Chapter 248. Renbachien held the broken saber in one hand and the tip of the saber in the other. He cursed inwardly. What happened to this precious saber? It broke with a flick of the saber? It was broken by the Empress's saber at a spot 5 centimeters inwards. Could it be glued with all-purpose glue? Or should it be melted down and reforged? What's the secret? The Empress looked curious. She sprinkled salt and cumin on the wound in Renbachien's heart. Your Majesty, this was originally a precious saber. Now it's broken. Renbachien's heart ached. A precious saber? I couldn't tell, the Empress replied non-committally. Sigh. Renbachien sighed. His mind was filled with thoughts on how to reattach the saber and whether it could still be used. He said helplessly, I accidentally discovered that this saber can change its length with my thoughts after being stained with blood. I thought it was a treasure and came to gift it to your Majesty. I didn't expect it to break. Change its length? The Empress found Renbachien's word strange, but she didn't find anything special about this saber. At least it can change its length, but I don't know if it can still be used. Renbachien pondered and cut his arm with the saber. Blood flowed directly onto the saber. The first time he cut himself, he was still afraid of pain and clenched his teeth for a long time. The second and third time he cut himself, even though he was still afraid of pain, he didn't hesitate anymore. Now that he had cut himself, Renbachien felt that it didn't matter anymore. He didn't show any mercy and didn't even frown. He didn't even realize that he had awakened some strange attribute. The Empress frowned slightly when she saw Renbachien's actions. She then focused on the saber in his hand. Grow, grow, grow. Following Renbachien's thoughts, the saber gradually elongated in the Empress's eyes, from less than 1 foot to 2 feet long. The Empress exclaimed softly. It was actually true. However, even though the saber was elongated, the front end was still broken. Renbachien held the broken saber and thought that since it could change its length, it definitely wasn't an ordinary saber. Now that there was still blood on it, he wanted to see if the tip of the saber could reattach itself. If it was an ordinary saber, it definitely wouldn't work. However, Renbachien still had some expectations for this saber. Renbachien connected the blades together. As the blood was gradually absorbed by the blade, the crack at the joint gradually shrank until it was as thick as a strand of hair. Although there was still a crack, when he released one of his hands, the entire blade was connected together and didn't fall off. Success! Renbachien was overjoyed at the unexpected good news. He thought that this treasured saber would die before it could be used. Unexpectedly, it could be retrieved by itself. It was indeed a treasured saber. Renbachien hurriedly sprinkled some more blood on the saber. The hair-thin crack gradually faded and finally disappeared. The saber became the same as before, but the gap on the blade was still there. Your Majesty, it's indeed a treasured saber. You actually managed to retrieve it. Renbachien happily handed the saber to the Empress with both hands. At this moment, the Empress was also somewhat interested. She took the saber and examined it carefully. At this moment, the saber was 2.5 feet long. The original rust on it had also disappeared. There was a cold gleam on the blade. The only flaw was that there were a few rice grain-sized gaps on the blade. Just now, she personally saw the saber grow from 1 foot to 2.5 feet. She also personally saw the tip of the saber being reattached. Naturally, she knew that this saber was indeed not an ordinary saber. She tapped the tip of the saber on her fingertip. A white dot appeared on her fingertip. Then, she used the saber to cut her palm. A white line appeared on her palm and disappeared in a flash. Your Majesty! Renbachien was first shocked by the Empress's actions. Soon after, he was speechless. Even though this saber couldn't cut through iron like mud, it couldn't be considered blunt either. When he cut his body, his flesh was split open. Yet, when it cut the Empress's skin, it actually only left a white line. It couldn't even penetrate her defense. He grabbed the Empress's wrist and felt the temperature of her palm. Her skin was exquisite and smooth. It seemed to be no different from that of an ordinary girl. At most, her skin was a little better. It was really hard to imagine that the Empress's skin could actually only leave a white line after being cut by a saber. She was so powerful that she simply didn't seem like a human. The Empress used her strength to cut her palm again. However, the white line only lasted for a little longer. After that, it slowly returned to its original state. 2 fair fingers cut the saber's body. But a soft sound was heard. Clang. More than half of the saber's body fell to the ground. Rinpochen, treasure saber, you died so miserably. Its sharpness and hardness are ordinary. Other than being able to lengthen and shorten, it's no different from an ordinary saber. Keep it for fun, the Empress said indifferently. Even though it was somewhat novel, the Empress lost interest in this saber after trying it out. Rinpochen looked at the saber that had fallen to the ground and was somewhat speechless. Treasure saber, you are really too disappointing. You broke it with just a touch. Are you here to extort money? To think that he thought that he had obtained a treasure previously. At present, it could indeed be considered a treasure. However, other than using it for fun, it didn't seem to have much use. If this saber was used as a weapon, it wouldn't immediately break after a single slash. Rinpochen picked up the saber. He thought that since the Empress didn't want it, he would bring it back to Earth to study it. He wanted to know what exactly was going on with this saber. Your Majesty, do you want to play a game? Rinpochen suggested excitedly when he saw that the Empress was bored to death in the palace. What is it? The Empress asked casually. She wasn't too interested in it. Keith. Rinpochen took out the bag that contained the laptop previously. There were 2 game controllers inside. He had prepared these the previous time as he thought that if the Empress was bored in the palace, she could also play some games. Your Majesty, this should be done like this, like this. Rinpochen sat side by side with the Empress and taught her how to operate the game controllers. Seeing the small figure that appeared on the laptop screen, the Empress finally became a little more energetic and began to focus her attention. 1 hour later, perfect. A sound was emitted from the laptop. Pa! The game controller in the Empress's hand turned into a pile of fragments and fell to the ground. Boring. The Empress's pretty face was almost raised to the sky with a look of disdain. As she loosened her grip, all the fragments in her hand fell to the ground. Rinpochen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Your Majesty, aren't you too much of a sore loser? The last time they played checkers, she smashed the checkers into powder with 1 slap. This time, she also smashed the game controller into pieces. Next time, it would be better to play Contra. He didn't know if the character would directly smash the laptop into pieces after death. Looking at the Empress's past 2 times, it wasn't impossible. It was full of dark history. Fortunately, the Empress didn't smash the laptop this time. Both of them could still watch a movie. After lunch, it was time for Rinpochen to practice martial arts. Just as he was about to pack his things, his gaze fell on the treasure saber that he had just broken. Suddenly, he discovered something that made him dumbfounded. The end of that short saber was only about 10 centimeters long and was slightly shorter than before. And the part that was broken was still the same length as when it was first broken. It was about 1 foot long. Your Majesty, look! Rinpochen was shocked as he picked up the broken saber. For a moment, his mind was filled with a magical melody. I have a beautiful wish when I grow up. I can sow the sun so 1 by 1 is enough will bear many, many suns, 1 for the South Pole, 1 for the Arctic Ocean, 1 to hang in the winter, 1 to hang at night. La, plant the sun, la la, plant the sun, la la la, plant the sun. The magical melody kept reverberating in Rinpochen's mind. All he had to do was to replace the word sun with treasure saber. If the broken part wouldn't shorten, would he be able to grow this saber by watering it with blood? As long as he watered it with blood, it would lengthen and then be cut off. Rinpochen was shocked. This was simply a magical weapon. Why would he still need to mine iron? He just had to plant the saber. Chapter 249. After a day of training, Rinpochen dragged his exhausted body back to Pingle Park with his treasure saber. I should give you a name. Rinpochen pondered for a while. Rui Jingu Saber? Should I call it Longevity Saber? Rinpochen grinned. This name wasn't bad. It could grow and change. Let's call it the Elongation Saber. Rinpochen felt that he needed a physics laboratory. This knife definitely couldn't be sent to a pharmaceutical laboratory. It was a pity that he had no money now. He could forget about the physics laboratory. It was not something that he could build with just 20 million yuan. Even if he could, he was not prepared to spend all his money. For the time being, he only needed to know how to use the knife. When he had the money, he would consider researching the knife. The next morning, Renbaqian excitedly went to the imperial kitchen to look for caretaker Go. Then he went to the lower hall. The imperial kitchen was divided into two parts. The first part was the upper hall where the empress usually ate. Now, his meals were also prepared here. The other part was the lower hall, which was responsible for the meals of the maids, female officials, and guards. Every day, the palace needed to slaughter the livestock there. When they arrived, they saw two giant goats, a wild boar, and a scimitar-horned cow ready to be slaughtered. In this world, the wild boar was called a black-faced gentleman, while the scimitar-horned cow was similar to a water buffalo. It was smaller than the fork-horned cow and wasn't as good at running as the fork-horned cow. Use this knife to kill. Renbaqian passed the broken knife to the person who was preparing to kill the livestock. The other party had a look of, "Are you kidding me?" This saber didn't even have a sharp point, and it was so short. In the end, Renbaqian used a knife that was specially used for slaughtering livestock and soaked the broken knife in a basin of blood. The blood of the 4 animals was sucked clean by it in 2 hours, causing the surrounding people to be shocked. In the past, the blood of a single animal could fill a large basin, but now it was all gone. Renbaqian did not explain anything. He carried the saber and returned to Pingle Park. As he thought, grow, 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 the saber grew from half a foot to 6 feet, which was 2 meters long. Renbaqian held the long saber and pointed it upwards. Suddenly, he felt that he was like Sephiroth, only lacking a head of elegant long hair and a leather windbreaker. Needless to say, this saber looked a bit thick when it was a short saber, but when it became a long saber, it looked a bit like a Zamadeo. However, Renbaqian also discovered a problem this time. This saber had absorbed the blood of 4 animals, and its length wasn't satisfactory. One had to know that the blood he spilled back then had caused it to grow 3 feet long. However, if he released all the blood from the 4 animals, he would only be able to absorb 6 feet of blood. If that was the case, the effect wouldn't be as great as he thought. Could it be that only human blood was effective? Could it be that only his blood was effective? At the thought of this, Renbaqian was shocked. After thinking about it carefully, this saber was indeed of little use. After slaughtering 4 animals in the palace every day, it was only 6 feet long. At the very least, he had to keep 1 foot of it for future use. As for a 5 feet long saber, Renbaqian weighed it in his hand and found that it weighed about 5 caddies. Over 1,500 caddies of iron a year was better than nothing. Unless they were sent to a slaughterhouse, but there were no slaughterhouses in this world. They were all slaughtered privately. Were they going to build a processing plant outside the city? If he really wanted to unleash the power of the longevity saber, this was the only way. Another question was that if the saber was not broken, it would shorten after a period of time. He did not know the reason. Was it really because the blood absorbed by the saber disappeared with the passage of time? Or did it actually increase other aspects of the blade? For example, hardness. Renbaqian felt that he could give it a try. After shortening the saber, it became half a foot long again. Its weight was also reduced. It was about the same weight as when the saber was broken. It was simply amazing. It did not conform to the law of conservation of mass at all. However, the saber seemed to be slightly longer than before it absorbed the blood. Renbaqian used his fingers to measure it. It seemed that it was indeed longer by about 1 centimeter. It seemed that as the saber absorbed the blood, it could grow back even if it was not reattached. However, he did not know if it would suffer from kidney deficiency if it kept growing and then continuously being broken. After experimenting for a while, Renbaqian carefully put the saber away and received news that the bricks were ready. Her Majesty summoned him to Yangxin Palace Hall. When Renbaqian arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, there were already 2 people standing there. One was Tong Jinye, and the other was someone he had never seen before. He only found out later that he was a junior minister from the Department of Works. Bricks and cement were initially handled by the Department of Ordnance. After all, Jingtian furnaces were also managed by the Department of Ordnance. Now, the firing of cement and clay bricks was transferred to the Department of Works. In front of Tong Jinye, there were a few pieces of street fighting equipment, bricks. Deputy Prefect Ren, do you think this is the right one? Tong Jinye asked after Ren Baqian greeted him. Ren Baqian raised his head and looked at the Empress before looking at the bricks with a face full of joy. They felt good to the touch, had a smooth surface, and were very heavy. They weren't as rough as modern red bricks. This was because coal ash wasn't added into the bricks. Even though firing them this way was more troublesome, the quality was the best and wouldn't deteriorate after hundreds of years. After smashing the bricks into pieces, they saw that the interior was very dense, unlike the black interior of the red bricks that had coal ash added. After Rinpoche examined them carefully, he laughed and said, "That's it. This method of firing bricks and building with cement is much easier than mining and polishing rocks." The others nodded their heads. This was indeed the case. "Let's do it this way then. The Ministry of Works will seize the time to fire these bricks and cement to build the glass factory. If there's anything you don't understand, look for Deputy Prefect Ren." The Empress nodded her head. Everyone obeyed the order. Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park again, took out the blueprint of the earthen kiln and handed it to Tong Jinye. The current earthen kiln firing speed was too slow and there were too few of them. If Dayo didn't completely rely on wood to fire, Rinpoche would have preferred to build a rotary kiln. This way, the speed of firing bricks and cement would be greatly increased. It's best to place the earthen kiln a little further away. "It's a good place to get the clay from," Rinpoche exhorted. "Why?" Tong Jinye asked curiously. Transporting clay was much easier than transporting bricks. In that case, most of the craftsmen would have to live there. The transportation of food and other supplies would also require more manpower. In that case, the consumption of supplies and manpower would be much higher. Otherwise, after a few years, when a large amount of burnt debris floats in the air, you won't even be able to see the stars when you look up. Rinpoche spread his hands and said. He was just short of saying that it was everyone's responsibility to protect the environment and leave a piece of azure sky for future generations. He didn't want to wake up every day in the next 10 or 20 years to be surrounded by a haze like a fairyland. However, it was still very difficult for Tong Jinye to understand. After all, the people in this world had never seen what was called air pollution. "Do as Deputy Prefect Ren said," the Empress said decisively. In this aspect, Rinpoche was much more knowledgeable than them. Only then did Tong Jinye nod his head in agreement. Following which, Tong Jinye looked at Rinpoche with an extremely strange gaze, which made Rinpoche's hair stand on end. "What's wrong?" Rinpoche didn't understand. "I heard a little about Deputy Prefect Ren from Tong Lan. Deputy Prefect Ren's shamelessness is similar to my demeanor in the past." Tong Jinye stroked his beard with a look of admiration on his face. However, even a fool could see that his eyes were filled with contempt. A few days ago, Her Majesty summoned Tong Lan to the palace as a sparring partner. Tong Jinye didn't think much of it. Even though Tong Lan was young, it wasn't a problem for her to fight 3 to 5 Rinpoche with one hand. However, when he was having a meal at the Tong residence, he casually asked about it. After hearing about what happened in the afternoon, he immediately spurted out his food. Not to mention him, even the rest of the people in the Tong residence were shocked. How could he be so shameless in front of the Empress and a 10-year-old child? Not only did he dare to mention brothels, he even threatened them with words like not returning the money. This was simply an eye-opener. Chapter 250. I'll go back with you. I've said before that I'll exterminate the entire family of those who attacked you previously, the Empress said to Rinpoche with an indifferent look on her face. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. The last time he came back, he was covered in blood and asked for forgiveness. He said that he was attacked on the road. In the past, he seemed to have told the Empress that he could only teleport to a fixed location. Furthermore, the few times he teleported with the Empress proved that this was true. As long as he brought the Empress back to Earth, he was afraid that he would immediately be exposed. "Your Majesty, when I return this time, I want to find out who the mastermind is. It will be very boring. I can't let your majesty accompany me to search for clues. Why don't you go with me after I find out who it is, your majesty? Rinpoche didn't panic at all as he smiled and spoke softly. What should we do if we encounter danger this time? With your skills, you can't even defeat a child, the Empress looked at him and asked. There was a tinge of concern in her voice as she conveniently stabbed a knife into Rinpoche's heart. I will be careful when I return this time. Moreover, I have to go through tempering. A flower in a greenhouse cannot withstand the wind and rain. The strength of ordinary people on Earth is worlds apart from that of the Aboriginals. If I can't deal with them, then I'm really useless, Rinpoche explained. Besides, I still have a gun. I didn't bring it with me last time, but I won't forget this time. As for the spear, the Empress was non-committal. It was like a toy to her. However, it did have a certain effect on ordinary people. Since you insist, we'll do as you say. Be careful, the Empress said with a hint of concern. Zixiao, I will be careful. After 2.5 days, I will be able to come back at any time. There won't be any danger. Rinpoche nodded with a gentle smile. In the palace, he rarely called the Empress by her name. At this moment, directly calling her by her name seemed rather intimate. After returning to Pingle Park, Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she didn't insist. Otherwise, something big would have happened. However, even though she didn't insist, he felt guilty when he thought about how she treated him. This caused a guilty look to appear on his face. It was better not to lie to her next time. Getting injured and asking for forgiveness once was enough. If you walk too much at night, you will inevitably run into ghosts, and a general will inevitably die in battle. He remembered that he used to be a famous, honest and cute young man, but now it seemed that lying had almost become an instinct. Life. Rinpoche sighed slightly and took out the pistol from the house. He was lying to the Empress and there wasn't any danger. Naturally, there was no need for him to bring a pistol with him. On Earth, having a pistol in one's hand would be troublesome. He changed his clothes and looked at the gun on the bed. In the end, he stuffed it into his waist pocket. The next moment, he disappeared. That kid is really hard to find. Let's wait a little longer. If he still doesn't come back, Rinpoche heard this voice as soon as he returned to Earth. Looking in the direction of the voice, he saw a tall and skinny man with glasses sitting on the sofa. Apart from him, there were 2 other men standing beside him, all of them exuding a tough aura. At this moment, the 3 of them were staring at Rinpoche. It was obvious that they were stunned by his sudden appearance. Rinpoche was also dumbfounded. He looked around and realized that this was his house, but where did these 3 people come from? F***ck, could it be such a coincidence? Something big had happened. I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it, it really surprised me. After the man sitting on the sofa calmed down, he immediately clapped and laughed. He let out a series of sighs and his face was filled with a mixture of shock and surprise. Want to chat for a while? That man stretched out his hand and made a gesture. Even though he sounded like he was asking, he didn't have the slightest intention of asking. Rinpoche's mind was filled with questions. He also wanted to know who these people were and what they were here for. However, there was one thing he was sure of: something big had really happened. Rinpoche calmed himself down, restrained the shocked expression on his face, and put on a tranquil look. How do I address you? Rinpoche stood at the same spot without moving. The 2 men immediately stretched out their hands to grab Rinpoche's shoulders. Rinpoche's body moved in an instant. He shifted his elbow upwards and stamped his right foot on the other man's foot. Following which, he lifted his crotch with a kick. That man didn't even have the chance to groan before he fell to the ground while holding onto his crotch. Upon seeing this, the other man glared at Rinpoche. Rinpoche's figure shifted to the side. Following which, he used the matchless vanguard and used both of his hands to smash his opponent's chest. His opponent immediately flew backward and smashed the coffee table into pieces. Rinpoche had made some progress in his martial arts training these days. In addition, his strength had also increased a lot. Now, he could already weigh 220 kilograms. His speed was also slightly faster than an ordinary person, so he could easily take down these two men. Your skills are not bad. The bespectacled middle-aged man wasn't the slightest bit surprised by the change in the situation. Instead, he applauded and praised Rinpoche. He then added, "But you better behave now. I don't really like people touching me. Now we can chat." Rinpoche leaned against the wall and asked, "Who are you?" "Who I am isn't important, but there's no harm in telling you. My name is Jin Jun, Jin as in gold, and Jun as in gentleman," Jin Jun said fearlessly. "What are you doing here?" Originally, it was because of some other matters. Jin Jun picked up a stack of white paper that was scattered on the ground after the coffee table was smashed. "I'm very interested in the shares that you have in this laboratory. Although I don't know how you did it, you actually made Chen Yan withdraw his business in other areas to invest in this laboratory. You are actually the biggest shareholder." Jin Jun put the stack of paper aside. "What do you know?" Rinpoche frowned. That stack of paper seemed to be the contract between him and Papa Chin. It was previously placed in the bedroom, but it seemed like they had dug it out. He wasn't surprised that he was exposed. The shareholders of the laboratory could be checked through the Industrial and Commercial Bureau. Although it was a little difficult for ordinary people, it was easy for those with some status and connections. However, he didn't expect that before there were any results from the laboratory, someone would target him directly. Was this person crazy? Did he think that he was overseas and dared to do anything? Why didn't he look for Papa Ma? Or was he just so unscrupulous to this extent? From the current situation, it was very obvious that the other party was so unscrupulous and treated him as a soft persimmon. Of course, in the eyes of outsiders, he was indeed a soft persimmon. A year ago, he was still an ordinary person. He didn't know how he got lucky and cooperated with Papa Chin. Furthermore, he even owned the majority of the shares. According to what he said, Papa Chin had withdrawn his business in other areas and focused his attention on the laboratory. This would definitely attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. Then they found him. After all, in their eyes, he was just an ordinary person. Now, he only had a piece of paper in his hands and didn't have any influence in society. It was very easy to deal with him. As long as they could take him down, they wouldn't need to pay a huge price to have a stake in the laboratory. After that, they could settle Papa Chin. If the other party had a grudge against Papa Chin, they could simply ruin the project that Papa Chin had invested a lot of money and energy into. Or, they could use some methods to distract Papa Chin's attention and defeat him in other areas. Business has its own way of doing things. The other party's methods were obviously despicable. Rinpoche suddenly recalled something. Previously, he was stabbed in the bar. Later on, he heard from Chin Chin that the other party had a business dispute with Papa Chin. The other party's target was Chin Chin. In the end, he was innocently stabbed. The same despicable method. Could it be this Jin Jun? Or could it be the person behind Jin Jun? Chapter 251. Were you the ones who stabbed me the last time? Rinpoche asked curiously. Jin Jun looked at Rinpoche carefully. He was very calm and didn't look flustered at all. It seemed that he was confident. Unfortunately, he was confident too. Neither side was in a hurry. You can't talk nonsense like that. We are serious businessmen. Jin Jun smiled faintly. Serious businessmen? Rinpoche laughed. It seemed that it was indeed the other party. Furthermore, the other party said, "we." It seemed that he was representing someone else. Otherwise, he would have said, instead of "we." Rinpoche, born in 1993, graduated from SY University 2 years ago, lives in Jinshan Garden in T-City, has parents and a younger brother. You see, we know a lot about you, so we're not afraid of you running away or doing something desperate. You can't run away today. Even if you do, you can't run away from the temple. Now, let's talk about something I'm interested in. For example, how did you suddenly appear? I'm more interested in this now. Jin Jun spread out his hands. He felt that he had discovered a big secret, which made him a little excited. From Rinpoche's past, he was just an ordinary person. Therefore, Jin Jun had nothing to worry about. He didn't even bring any weapons when he came. There was no need and it would cause trouble. What was there to worry about? Would the other party dare to do anything to the three of them? Not to mention his family, even if he was given a knife, would he dare to kill the three of them? Furthermore, could he kill them? From Renbachian's past, he was as clean and weak as a lamb. But now, he had changed his opinion. He didn't know when this kid learned some martial arts. But he wasn't too worried. Would the other party dare to do anything? Renbachian was silent for a while. After hearing what the other party said, his mood immediately turned sour. Although he knew that the other party was a despicable person, no one would be in a good mood when their family was threatened. He looked at the two thugs. One of them was still holding his crotch and rolling on the ground, unable to get up. The other one got up from the ground and looked at him fiercely. People change, Yizichin said. Renbachian sighed. He didn't need to explain the rest of the matter. He only needed to know a few points. First, the other party wasn't just these few people. There might be someone else behind them. Secondly, the other party had actually come for the laboratory that he was collaborating with Papachin. He could be considered unlucky. Upon hearing Renbachian's sigh, Jin-jun felt that something was amiss. Before he could react, Renbachian had already pointed the pistol at him and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, there was a silencer. After a few soft sounds, Jin-jun lay on the sofa with a shocked and puzzled expression. After that, the thug who had a fierce look on his face collapsed with a few bloody holes on his body. Renbachian lowered his head and looked at the man who was immersed in deep pain. Then he extended his leg and stepped on his neck. The Empress always liked to do this, and it seemed very refreshing. Suddenly, he wanted to give it a try. He did not expect the other party to grab his calf and try to throw him down. Unfortunately, the other party did not have much strength left. Renbachian felt a little regretful as he shot him in the head. Unlike hitting his body, the back of his head directly exploded. It was very disgusting. Renbachian walked to Jin-jun's side, straightened his body, and sat down beside him. Jin-jun was not dead yet, but he could not say anything. Blood was foaming from his mouth, and his eyes were filled with the fear of death. Surprised, aren't you? Renbachian put his hand on Jin-jun's shoulder. He saw that the other thug was still twitching and seemed to be alive. He raised his hand to shoot him again, and the other party immediately stopped moving. Actually, I am more surprised than you, Renbachian said unhurriedly with a sad look on his face. In any case, this is my home. Do you think this is the city gate when you come in and out? Tell me, who did I offend? Nothing good happens every day. It was not easy for me to return home, and I still have to bump into all of you. Don't you think I'm unlucky? Every day, this person thinks about me, that person thinks about me, Great Xia thinks about me, and all of you think about me. Renbachian rambled on. Jin-jun exhaled his last breath and collapsed weakly on Renbachian's shoulder. Until the moment of his death, he was listening to Renbachian's long-winded nonsense. His heart was filled with despair. Sigh, it's not easy to find someone to talk to. Why don't you wait for me to finish? Renbachian turned his head to look at Jin-jun and felt wronged. There weren't many opportunities to talk to people, and there were too many things that he couldn't say. It wasn't easy to find someone to talk to, and Jin-jun should have held on a little longer. Sigh. Renbachian sighed deeply and pushed Jin-jun aside. What should he do now? It would be easy if it was the last day. He could just clean up the scene and bring the corpses to the other world. However, he had just returned, and there were still 2.5 days left. In less than a day, the other party would probably come looking for him if they couldn't contact Jin-jun. Renbachian didn't think that Jin-jun's whereabouts weren't known. Therefore, he definitely couldn't leave the corpses here. However, there was a high risk of being discovered if he wanted to bring the 3 corpses downstairs and load them into the car. Only God knew if the other party only had 3 people. What if they left a driver downstairs? If he went downstairs, he would be discovered immediately. When the other party called Jin-jun and realized that he couldn't contact the 3 people, he was afraid that something would happen immediately. He might really have to flee for his life this time. How unlucky! Renbachian felt really wronged. Who did he offend? He went upstairs and walked around. Sure enough, the bedroom had been turned upside down. He packed some of his things and was ready to escape at any time. Then, he went to the Empress's room. There were many clothes that he bought for the Empress that filled the entire wardrobe. Unfortunately, he couldn't take them away. She wouldn't be unhappy, would she? Forget it, he would just buy more next time. He took out his phone and sent a video call home. His mother picked up after 2 rings. "You are getting younger and younger." Renbachien smiled and didn't seem like he was preparing to flee for his life. "You are finally willing to call home? When are you coming back? And that girl from last time?" Renbachien's mother couldn't forget her. "I'm going out for a while when I have time. I will go back after I return. It will be a few hours' journey. I only see you a few times a year. I have almost forgotten that I have a son like you." Renbachien chatted with his mother for 10 minutes before hanging up the phone with some regret. He hoped that he could get through this smoothly. Otherwise, it would be a long time before he could return home. Originally, his younger brother, Renwanyen, had gotten into a good university. His family was going to hold a graduation banquet and he was preparing to go back. Now, it was all ruined. In the end, it was all because of those unlucky people outside. "Hello, Shinqing, do you know someone called Jinjun?" Renbachien called Shinqing again. "Why did you ask about him? Where did you meet him? Did he create trouble for you?" Shinqing immediately asked after hearing Renbachien's question. "What's his background? Tell me in detail." Following Shinqing's explanation, Renbachien finally knew about Jinjun's background. Just as Renbachien thought, Jinjun didn't get along with Papa Chen and was considered a business rival. Among them, Jinwen, Jinwu, and then Jinjun were his 2 elder brothers. Among them, Jinwen was the leader, followed by Jinwu. Jinjun was the last but also the boldest one. The Jin family's influence wasn't small in this city. They were very underhanded and had a group of people under them. The previous bar incident was done by them. However, they rarely let others gossip about them. There were many henchmen who took the blame. Under the protection of these henchmen, Papa Chen couldn't do anything to them. After hearing Qing's words, Renbachien said, "I have some matters to attend to recently. Help me look after my family and be careful of the Jin family." "How did you become enemies with them? Is there anything I can help you with?" Qing immediately asked. Renbachien hung up the phone. There was really no one who could help him with his current situation. After walking around the house, he first found some transparent tape and stuck it on the gunshot holes on their bodies. He wanted to see if it could stop the bleeding. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to clean up the bleeding if it kept on bleeding. It was still all right. It was somewhat effective. After wrapping the wounds with a bedsheet, the blood finally stopped flowing out. It was just that the guy who was shot in the back of his head looked like a Sakama. It was too disgusting. After pulling the 3 of them together, Renbachien started to mop the floor. However, some blood had seeped into the cracks of the floorboards, so he could only mop the floor. After cleaning up, he looked at the gunshot hole on the floor and regretted shooting too quickly. Now, there was a gunshot hole on the floor and he couldn't clean it up even if he wanted to. He continued to look for pliers and dug out the bullet inside. However, there was a hole in the floorboards. After that, he found 2 more bullet holes on the sofa. Fortunately, the sofa was made of leather. Although it was stained with blood, it was still easy to clean up. If I had known earlier, I would have brought my elongation saber back. The other party is just a bunch of noobs. My 40-meter-long saber will give them a head start of 39 meters, Renbachien muttered as he flipped the sofa to look for bullets. An electronic ringtone sounded. Renbachien found the phone on Jinjun's body. When he saw the words Xiao Hui written on it, he answered the call. "Brother Jun, Brother Wen is still waiting for you. When are you leaving?" Upon hearing this, Renbachien immediately knew that it was most likely the driver waiting downstairs. Moreover, Brother Wen was Jin Wen, right? It seemed like he couldn't hide it for long. Cough, cough. Renbachien coughed violently and spat. He pretended that his throat was uncomfortable and tried his best to imitate Jinjun's voice. "Come up." His voice was a little different. Renbachien hoped that the other party would think that his throat was uncomfortable, which was why his voice had changed. "Brother Jun, is your throat uncomfortable?" "I'm coming," The person on the other side of the phone said. Rinpoche hung up the phone to vent his anger. It seemed like he could hide it for a while longer. Rinpoche first dragged the 3 corpses to a corner, then sat on the sofa and waited for the other party to come in. Brother June? After a while, a person's voice came from the door. Soon after, the door was pulled open. The other party wasn't very prepared. As soon as the person came in, he saw a handsome but blood-stained young man pointing a pistol at him. Before he could shout out, Rinpoche pulled the trigger. After closing the door, Rinpoche turned to look inside the house and sighed. Although the place had been cleaned up, there were still bloodstains in the corners of the walls and the cracks in the floor. There were also bullet holes in the floor and sofa. Even if he cleaned up the corpses, he would immediately be exposed if the police came looking for him. Not to mention the surveillance cameras that showed only a few people coming up the elevator. The evidence was conclusive. Chapter 252. Rinpoche closed the door and squatted in front of the young man. The young man's mouth was foaming with blood like a crab. His eyes were filled with fear. He did not expect that the person waiting for him was not Jin Jun but another young man. Furthermore, he could feel that his life was slipping away from him. I think you can still be saved. Rinpoche squatted in front of him with a kind face. That's why you have to speak quickly. If you don't speak quickly, there will be no hope. Where is Jinwen? The young man continued to spit out blood. His neck was like an old hen's for a long time, but he could not say a word. It can't be. Rinpoche was flabbergasted. Where did he hit? He carefully looked at the bleeding spots on the young man's body. One was shot in the lung and the other was near the heart. It was already good enough that the young man was not dead, let alone talking. When he finished looking at the wounds, the young man finally let out a squeak and stopped breathing. Sigh. Actually, I aimed for his stomach. Do you believe me? Rinpoche looked disappointed and disappointed. He did not care whether the young man could hear him or not. This time he really had to escape. There were still Jin Wen and Jin Wu in the Jin family. He was afraid that they would come for him before tomorrow. He only had 2 choices. One was to wait for them to come and continue to kill them. However, even if he killed them, it would be useless. He could not carry so many corpses away. Furthermore, it would be easy for the police to stop him at home. The other choice was to escape. Rinpoche felt wronged. In a year or 2, the green vine hangover medicine would be on the market. In another 2 or 3 years, the black mud cream and leukemia medicine would also be on the market. At that time, he would have money and status. He would be able to reach the pinnacle of his life and win the heart of a rich and beautiful woman. But now, all his hopes were dashed. Rinpoche went back to his room to take a shower, change his clothes, and gave Chinching a call. Then, he carried the things that he had just packed and hurriedly went downstairs. As for the corpses, he did not care. This house could not be kept. It was a pity that he had just bought it. 5 people had died consecutively. He did not know if anyone would dare to live in this house in the future. In any case, Rinpoche felt that the feng shui of this house was not very good. Half an hour later, Rinpoche carried a suitcase and appeared at a bank not far away with Chinching. He withdrew 1 million yuan in cash and placed it in the suitcase. He then transferred the remaining 20 million yuan to Chinching. Because of this, the bank manager interrogated him about the purpose of the transfer, fearing that it was money laundering. What do you want to do? Chinching frowned and had a look of surprise on his face. Even a fool would know that something was wrong with the situation. We'll talk after we get out of here, Rinpoche whispered. After settling the matter with the bank manager, Rinpoche and Chinching carried their suitcases and left the bank. Rinpoche also took out the luggage that he had previously placed in his car and stuffed it into Chinching's car. Then, he turned around and said, I have something to attend to and have to run away. As for the money I just transferred to you, find someone to transfer it to a certain card through other channels. I'll let you know when the time comes. At this moment, Rinpoche had an innocent and helpless look on his face. He looked as miserable as a bullied child could be. He was just short of tears and snot. He transferred the money to Chinching because he was afraid that if the police froze his bank account, he would be in trouble. Even if it wasn't frozen, the moment he withdrew the money, he would be exposed. Now, he could only hope that Chen could use other channels to help him launder a sum of money. As for whether Chen would embezzle this sum of money and whether the Chen family would swallow up his shares, there was no need to consider these questions now. So serious? If you offended Jun, it won't be to that extent. I'll think of a way for you. Chen frowned. It's more serious than you think. Renbaqian didn't mention that he had killed someone. In a while, send me the addresses of the few important people in the Jin family, especially the places where they usually go at night. Send it to another phone. Renbaqian left the phone number that he had prepared for the Empress to Chen. In his heart, he was thinking that he would definitely bring the Empress back next time. You have caused me so much trouble, I have to let you reunite with your family. A famous person once said that the most important thing for a family was to be neat and tidy. When Chen heard Renbaqian's words, he was a little apprehensive and asked, "What are you going to do?" "Just send it to me. Even if you don't know, your father will know. Don't ask about other things first. You will know tomorrow or the day after." After Renbaqian finished speaking, he opened the door of Chen car and swaggered off. Chen, who was left at the same spot, had a gloomy look on his face. Where should I run to now? Renbaqian pondered. Logically speaking, he should run overseas. No matter what, for lives were still a big case. However, he couldn't go too far now. There were still so many people from the Jin family waiting for him. It was a pity that he didn't have sarin gas with him. Forget it, even if he had it, he wouldn't dare to throw it. Killing people and throwing poisonous gas were two different things. If he dared to throw it, there would be no place in the world where he could hide. Now, he only had two choices. He could either run to the mountains or hide in the city. As long as he could hide for 2.5 days, he would be fine. Now, almost half a day had passed. There were still 2 days left. If he was optimistic, the Jin family would still need half a day to find his house. That would be 1.5 days. Renbaqian couldn't make up his mind about these two choices. After all, he didn't have much experience in escaping. Just as he was aimlessly driving out of the city, his gaze swept across a shop by the street. He immediately stopped the car by the roadside. It was a musical instrument shop. Renbaqian's eyes were practically brimming with tears when he saw this shop. If he knew about Eru, would he need to run away? All he had to do was to bring the Empress and annihilate the entire Jin family. This was simply a murder case caused by an error. A single slip may cause everlasting sorrow. Looking back, you become a wanted criminal. Renbaqian sighed and got out of the car. He ran into the shop and picked out the Eru for a long time. He even played Laughing in the Pugilistic World, which made the shop owner gasp in amazement. This was the first time he saw someone play Laughing in the Pugilistic World in such a miserable manner. After throwing the Eru into the car, Renbaqian decided to hide in the wilderness. There were too many surveillance cameras in the city, and he didn't have much experience in hiding. He ran to an outdoor shop and bought a big backpack and a light sleeping bag. Then he found a delicatessen and bought 3 caddies of braised beef. Finally, he bought 2 bottles of white wine and 2 loaves of bread. After parking the car in a remote place, Renbaqian stuffed everything into the backpack. He tied the sleeping bag to the backpack and carried the suitcase in one hand and the Eru in the other. He flagged down a car and drove to another remote place. Seeing that it was surrounded by long walls and there didn't seem to be any surveillance cameras, Renbaqian got out of the car and waited for a while. Then he flagged down another taxi and went to Beijing County. After arriving, he changed to another taxi and headed to the old Balding Mountain. This mountain was more than 1,000 meters tall and had a large forest area. It hadn't been developed and was suitable for hiding. He didn't know how much of an impact he would have on the other party's tracking. In any case, he could only try his best to do what he thought of. When he reached the foot of the mountain, it was already dark. Without any delay, he bought a flashlight and climbed the mountain overnight. Panting and crawling for a few hundred meters, Renbaqian truly felt that having too much money could crush someone to death. That box of money and the weight of the suitcase didn't exceed 25 caddies. It was getting heavier and heavier in his hands. There were a few times when he wanted to throw the suitcase away. However, when he thought that he still needed money when he was on the run, he persevered. At this point in time, more than half a day had passed and there were less than 2 days left. At this moment, Chen Qing was sitting in a small shop at the entrance of the neighborhood where Rinpoche lived. He looked at the police cars going in and out of the shop window and remained silent. 2 hours ago, he already knew what had happened. Rinpoche had actually killed that Jin Jun. Furthermore, he had killed 4 people and drove his own car to escape. No wonder it was as though he was making funeral arrangements today. As for why Jin Jun was at Rinpoche's house, he had some guesses, but he wasn't sure. I really couldn't tell. Jiang Nan, who was sitting opposite him, was in a daze. She didn't know how to evaluate Rinpoche. She had never expected Rinpoche to do such a thing. It was really unexpected. At this point in time, all the police officers in the city and a large number of hooligans were looking for Rinpoche. Early the next morning, the people at the police station had already obtained some information on Rinpoche's whereabouts. After killing 4 people, that person went to the bank to withdraw money and transferred the rest of the money to someone else. Everyone could understand this. It also showed that this criminal was very dangerous and had a very strong mental fortitude. He was completely unlike an ordinary person. How could an ordinary person calmly make all sorts of arrangements after doing such a thing? However, what he did next made everyone puzzled. That person actually went to a musical instrument shop to buy an eru? And he even played the song, Laughing Wanderer? What kind of situation was this? Chapter 253. Rinpoche heard the barking from afar and knew that the police were here. They were fast, much faster than he expected. He didn't know if the police solved the case quickly or if the Jean family was powerful. Even though he didn't make any arrangements, he had changed cars a few times. It would take some time for the police to track his route, right? Rinpoche sat on the rock and pondered. He couldn't just leave like this, right? Even if he were to leave, he had to let them know that he had been here. Thinking of this, he took out a pen and paper from his bag, wrote a note, and pressed it on the rock. Then, he disappeared before the other party saw him. Half a day later, a team of policemen followed the police dogs to this place and saw a note. The handwriting on the note looked like it was scratched by a chicken's claw. It took them a long time to recognize the words on the note. "Comrades, you have worked hard." Everyone flew into a rage after reading the words on the note. Everyone was gnashing their teeth. This murderer was too daring and arrogant. This was simply a provocation. However, the police dogs only circled around this area and couldn't detect any aura anymore. It was as if the person had disappeared from this place. Hundreds of police officers searched the mountain for 5 days, but in the end, they couldn't even find a strand of hair. Only that note made everyone gnash their teeth in anger, swearing to arrest this guy and bring him to justice. Sigh. When Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park, he started to sigh again. He threw his things on the ground, took out the eru, and played a sad song, Trouble Caused by the Moon. The guards outside looked as if they had seen a ghost. I admit that it's all because of the eru. That kind of night is too beautiful, and you are too gentle. After he finished singing, Rinpoche felt the knot in his heart lighten a little. He didn't provoke anyone, but he abandoned his family and business to become a wanted criminal. He even had to hide in the mountain for 2 days. When he was hungry, he ate braised beef. When he was thirsty, he drank ergwotu. It could be said that he was miserable. After sighing for a long time, Rinpoche washed his face, changed his clothes, and ran to see the Empress. "Your Majesty, all the clothes you left at home are gone." Rinpoche sighed when he saw the Empress. The Empress raised her eyebrows. She liked many of those clothes. Furthermore, who dared to touch her things? Even the house is gone. "What's the matter?" the Empress asked coldly. From her tone, one could tell that she was very unhappy. "I was too careless. I didn't think that the other party would stop after attacking me last time and come directly to my house. I had no choice but to kill him. However, I also became a fugitive because of this. Now, I have a home that I can't return to, and I have to hide from place to place. Fortunately, I saw a musical instrument shop on my way to escape. I remembered that I promised your majesty to bring back an arrow, so I didn't dare to throw it away even when I was escaping. Fortunately, he had returned safely. However, I'm afraid I'll be hunted down again when I return. Renbachien looked aggrieved and took out the arrow at the right time. This time around he didn't forget to play it. The Empress's heart softened when she saw his appearance and said, "Forget it, it's good that you are back. I will go with you next time and see what they can do." At present, Renbachien wasn't in the mood to play Pomp and Circumstance, but he was in the mood to play Second Spring Reflecting the Moon. Fortunately, the Empress didn't mention it and was very considerate of him. After 2 days, Renbachien's mood was finally better. After all, things had already come to this point, and it was useless to sigh. Being a fugitive wasn't a serious matter for Renbachien now. He could teleport once every 2 to 3 days, and it would take about 10 days for him to appear again. It wouldn't be easy for the other party to catch him. Even if he was caught, as long as he wasn't killed on the spot, he could bring the Empress back and directly break out of prison. However, he couldn't stay in the country anymore and could only go abroad. In fact, it wasn't that there was no other way. For example, he could go to a big country for plastic surgery and change his appearance. However, it was hard to say how the Empress would react when she saw his completely new face. Renbachien thought about it and decided to continue to escape with this face. On the 3rd day, Renbachien and the Empress sat in the garden. It was a sunny morning. In the distance, Qin Yuan, Hong Wan, and the 2 imperial guards looked curiously at the strange thing in Renbachien's hand and kept guessing what he was going to do. The Empress's face was full of anticipation. She also didn't know what an arrow performance would be like. However, when Renbachien said that he would play it for her, she was full of anticipation and felt a little sweet in her heart. Renbachien struck a pose with a face full of confidence. He had trained hard to play the Little Hussien version of Pomp and Circumstance. Then he took a deep breath. When the delicate moans of the arrow came out, the Empress immediately got goosebumps all over her body, and her eyes widened. The surrounding imperial guards tensed up and looked as if they had seen a ghost. What was this thing? It gave people the feeling that the arrow in Renbachien's hand had turned into a spirit. The delicate moans were full of enchantment. If one had to describe it, it would be coquettish. It was simply too coquettish. Renbachien looked intoxicated. As the music progressed, it finally became a little more normal. However, even the cheerful rhythm at the climax was full of a seductive aura. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, the delicate moans were repeated again. The Empress exerted force and directly grabbed a piece of the stone table in front of her, but she didn't even feel it. She was really shocked. Her face was filled with shock and a little bewilderment. Even when she was facing the 9 pavilions, she didn't have such a huge emotional fluctuation. Her heart, which was usually as calm as a lake, was now like a landslide and a tsunami. She couldn't calm down even for a moment with the sound of the arrow. When the Empress heard the delicate moans, the veins on her forehead started to bulge. Qin Yuan and Hong Wan were already stunned. Both of them looked at Renbachien with their mouths wide open. Those imperial guards looked as if they were constipated, and their whole bodies were trembling. Before Renbachien could finish playing the piece that he was so proud of, the stone table had already started to fall piece by piece. The Empress subconsciously used her fingers to scratch the surface of the stone table. Half of the stone table that was half a foot thick had disappeared. Renbachien only played halfway before abruptly stopping. He had a look of longing on his face. This was because the Little Hussien version only stopped here. It was said that the neighbor of Little Hussien smashed the door and barged in. Renbachien felt that he had never performed so smoothly before. He was so engrossed in his performance today. He opened his eyes and looked at the Empress with a face full of admiration. Your Majesty, why are there blue veins on your forehead?" The Empress snatched the arrow and threw it dozens of meters away like a concealed weapon to the imperial guards. She gritted her teeth and said, "Suppress this thing under the plaza in front of the palace." The 2 imperial guards felt as if they had been granted amnesty. Without saying a word, they carried the arrow and dashed out. Chapter 254. Halfway up the mountain, it was pitch black. Only the dim moon in the sky shone a little silver light. Two people were standing there. One of them was squatting in a Slavic posture while the other was standing straight like a javelin. The night wind blew her long hair. "I've asked someone to watch your family. The police are keeping an eye on you. Be more careful. Try not to call home." There were two messages. The first one was about Jin Wen and Jin Wu's possible locations at night. The other one was about this. Sigh. Renbaqian wanted to sigh again. Every time he thought about this, he felt like he was constipated. After a while, Renbaqian stood up and looked into the distance with a solemn face. "Your Majesty, let's go." Like a chick, the Empress carried him by the back of his neck and leaped into the distance. After leaping for nearly 100 meters, she landed on the ground. The wind blew on Renbaqian's face. Even though he was being carried by the neck like a chick, Renbaqian still managed to maintain his solemn face. Feeling the oncoming gale, he was inspired to write a poem and silently recited, "There will be a time when the wind breaks the waves." The last sentence was to hang the sail to save the vast sea. However, Renbaqian was now the one being held by the Empress, fluttering in the wind. Moving at a speed of 300 miles per hour on the mountain, the Empress leaped more than 10 meters into the air. This was really too exciting. Even though he knew that nothing would happen, Renbaqian's heart was still racing like an elevator following the Empress's movements. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. With the Empress's speed, she could cover a distance of more than 200 kilometers in an hour. Renbaqian had a lingering wish. It would be great if the Empress could carry him on her back. It would be much better than being carried like a flag fluttering in the wind. Jin Wen put down the document in his hand, took off his reading glasses, and rubbed his temples. "Is there still no news of that kid?" Jin Wen asked. "Yes, Brother Wen," a man in a shirt standing beside him replied. Jin Wen rubbed his temples and picked up another piece of paper. On it was a photo of a young man. This was all of Renbaqian's information. He had seen it more than once. Up until now, he was still a little surprised that such a person could actually kill his third brother and 3 other subordinates. Also, where did that brat go? It had been half a month. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. It had been so long, but they still couldn't find him. Third brother's wife was making a fuss every day, and the people below were also restless. If he really let this kid run away, his face would be thrown into the ditch. "The police are still watching his hometown?" Jin Wen asked. "Yes, but they are about to withdraw," the man said again. "When the time comes, I'll arrange for his family to die a good death. Don't be too quick. Take it slow." "I don't believe that kid won't show up," Jin Wen said casually. Killing someone was difficult, but sometimes it was also very simple. A simple accident was all that mattered. After saying that, Jin Wen took out a box of tea leaves from his drawer and placed it in a covered bowl. The man in the shirt quickly boiled a pot of water, but Jin Wen still made the tea himself. This was his habit. At that moment, the window opposite Jin Wen's room suddenly exploded. Then, 2 figures appeared in the room. The sudden change stunned Jin Wen. One had to know that this was the 17th floor. How could someone break the window and come in? However, he didn't slow down. He immediately took out a gun from the drawer and pointed it at the other party. Only then did he carefully identify the 2 figures. One of them was a man. He wasn't very eye-catching, but he looked somewhat familiar. The other was the woman beside him. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "Brother Wen, it's that kid." The man in the shirt cried out in surprise. A little doubt emerged in Jin Wen's mind. That kid. Then he realized who it was. It was the kid with the surname Ren who killed his third brother. After taking a closer look at the 2 of them, he didn't see any ropes on their bodies. This made him a little puzzled as to how they came in. However, a cold smile hung on his face. "Although I have always hoped that you would appear in front of me, I didn't expect it to be like this." As he spoke, he pulled the trigger. 6 gunshots rang out in succession. 4 of them were shot at the woman in red, and the other 2 were shot at Renbaqian. It couldn't be helped. The appearance of these 2 people was too strange. If he didn't beat them half to death first, he wouldn't be able to rest easy. However, the red-clothed woman's arms seemed to shake, but it also seemed like she didn't move at all. Everything was just an illusion. On the other hand, the two of them were still standing there unscathed. Rinpoche widened his eyes in shock. This old bastard was actually more ruthless than him? Why didn't he say anything and just opened fire? Jin Wen was even more shocked than Rinpoche. He had fired all the bullets in his pistol in one go, but the two of them were still unscathed. What the hell? Jin Wen immediately had this thought in his mind, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. The Empress looked calm and collected. With a wave of her palm, more than 10 bullets flew out. The man standing a meter away from Jin Wen was instantly beaten into a sieve. Zixiao, your kung fu is really unparalleled in the world. Rinpoche gave her a thumbs up. The Empress's face turned even darker and her eyes turned cold. She subconsciously rubbed her fingers and wished she could throw it again. The man's body was covered in blood, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Both of you, we can talk about anything. Jin Wen looked panicked. The Empress stood at the edge of the rooftop and looked down. She thought of something she saw just now and panicked. Zixiao. I was scared to death just now. Rinpoche lay on the ground and didn't want to move at all. He was really scared just now. The Empress acted as if she didn't hear what he said. After a long time, she finally calmed down. She turned her head and looked at Rinpoche coldly. Where are we going next? There are still a few places. We are still short of 4 people. Rinpoche lay on the ground with one hand covering his heart. Point the way. Following which, the two of them went to a few more places and finally completed the mission. Jin Wen, Jin Wu, and their wives and children were finally reunited. Although it sounded a little cruel, Rinpoche felt that it would be cruel to himself if he left one of them alive. As for the rest, he didn't need to care about them as they would be in a mess. Late at night, Rinpoche and the Empress stood on the rooftop of a building. The place opposite them was a very comical place for him. At the city police station, Rinpoche sat at the edge of the rooftop and took out his phone to make a call. He had just swiped the phone. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. It was Papa Chin who sounded very tired. Dad. Rinpoche said softly. Bachin? Where are you? How are you now? What exactly happened? The police said that you killed someone. Upon hearing Rinpoche's voice, Papa Chin immediately lowered his voice and asked anxiously. Meanwhile, at the police station of T City and S City, that fellow has appeared. Following a shout and a wave of panic, everyone crowded around the computer. Each and every one of them had a look of surprise on their faces. That bastard had finally appeared. Nowadays, it wasn't as troublesome to use a surveillance van like in the past. They just had to think of a way to plant a virus in the phone. I'm fine, don't worry, Rinpoche said in a relaxed tone. It's good that you are fine. If you are wrongly accused, then turn yourself in. Your mother and I will definitely help you clear your name. Papa Chin hesitated for a while and said in a deep voice. Until now, he still didn't believe that his son would kill someone. In his heart, Rinpoche started his business last year. His conditions were getting better and better, and he even gave a large sum of money to his family. Why would he give up such a bright future and kill someone? I am really wrongly accused. Rinpoche felt wronged. Upon hearing this, Papa Chin immediately felt that his son was indeed wrongly accused. His face revealed a look of surprise. Rinpoche could even hear his mother's panting from the other end of the phone. Don't worry, both of you. I'm fine. I know the rest and it's not convenient for me to say too much. Just know that I'm doing well. Rinpoche continued to speak in a relaxed tone. Rinpoche spoke to his parents for 2 minutes before hanging up the phone and throwing it on the rooftop behind him. At the opposite police station, a large number of people had already rushed out. A few minutes later, the police rushed up to the rooftop and only saw a phone on the floor. The rest was empty. They searched the entire building for a whole night but still couldn't find any trace of Rinpoche. The phone that Rinpoche used belonged to Jin Jun's son. It was very easy to find him. When the police arrived at Jin Jun's house, they only saw 3 corpses. Following that was Jin Wen, Jin Wu, and the note on the bed in Jin Wu's room. People say that the most important thing for a family is to be in order. Now we are all in order. When they saw this note, it was unknown how many people gnashed their teeth in hatred. A total of 11 members of the Jean family were killed in different places in one night. This wasn't just an ordinary murder case. Furthermore, there was a note left behind by the murderer. It was simply showing off and provoking. Vile, simply too vile and insane. Chapter 255. A young man with glasses was browsing the largest video website when he suddenly noticed a video titled, "Cultivators Really Exist," that had just been uploaded half a minute ago. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the video. The picture was a little blurry, which was caused by the phone shooting at night. Judging from the opposite floor in the video, the position of the person who shot the video should be between the 7th and 9th floor. At the same time, a miserable voice came from the speaker, "Help." It sounded like a chicken being slaughtered. Then he saw a man falling from the sky on the screen, which made his heart skip a beat. He couldn't help but curse, "Immortal cultivator, my ass." Someone obviously fell from the building. At this moment, the figure that was falling suddenly disappeared. He retreated and looked carefully again. He saw that two people suddenly appeared on the opposite wall of the tall building and then disappeared again. One of them was the person who fell from the building, and the other seemed to be a woman. "It's fake, right?" He muttered subconsciously and was ready to refresh the video to watch it again. However, when he refreshed it again, he found that the video was lost. Damn, it can't be real, right? If he had thought it was fake before, then the video had disappeared so quickly, which made his imagination run wild. Conspiracy theories had always been believed by many people. "Boss, look at this video." As a young man called out, a man in his 30s walked behind him and watched. It was the video that had just been uploaded half a minute ago, but the clarity was much higher. Especially after the brightness was adjusted, the two figures in the picture were even more conspicuous. "It's fake," the man in his 30s concluded at a glance. "Boss, this hasn't been processed. It looks real." "Impossible," the man in his 30s concluded. In the video, a woman could be seen rushing at the falling figure at a super high speed. She lifted his clothes and brought him to the opposite wall. Then she stepped on the wall and rushed up diagonally. This was simply impossible. The speed at which a person fell from a high altitude was about 23 meters per second. The speed of the woman in the video was far faster than that. It was not something that a human could achieve. After watching the video 3 times, the man in his 30s looked solemn. Although his reason told him that it was impossible, everything in the video was too real. Most importantly, this video was taken with a mobile phone and had not been modified by any software. In other words, it was very likely to be true. The next morning, this video and the case in S City were spread to some people's desks. Both happened in the same place. In the case of Severny, 11 people died in different locations within an hour. This was not something that 1 or 2 people could do. At the very least, several groups of people had to work together. But at every crime scene, there were only traces of the same man and woman. Coupled with this video, it immediately made some people feel as if they had discovered something incredible, something that could change the perception of mankind. Find him. Don't use force. Talk to him first. Such an order and the information of the 2 people were sent to a certain department. One of them had detailed information, while the other only had an ID card. "The boundless horizon is my love, flowers are blooming at the foot of the rolling green mountains." A dilapidated off-road vehicle was running wildly on the grassland. At present, Rinpochen and the Empress were in MG Nation in the north. It was more than 600 kilometers away, and both of them had rushed here in one night. Then they randomly found an unlucky guy, knocked him out, and threw him to the side of the road. Now, Rinpochen had already given up. He had already done vile things, and there was no longer any psychological pressure to do other things. In any case, if he was caught, he would be dragged out and shot for 5 minutes. In any case, they wouldn't be able to catch him. In any case, even if they caught him, he could still escape from prison. Rinpochen's current target was the country in the north that was known as a fighting nation. It was a country that would duel with bears and beat them until they cried. When he arrived there, he would head west toward Europe. At that time, he might stop at a country in Eastern Europe or go to South America. He heard that it was more chaotic there. To ordinary people, chaos was a terrible thing, but to him, it wasn't a big deal as long as he didn't get shot in the back. Every 7 days, he could increase his strength by 15 kilograms. Now, his strength had already reached 225 kilograms. In addition, he was ravaged by that little girl with 2 buns on her head every day. Ren Bachien felt that he could survive anywhere. Moreover, he was still getting stronger. Even if he couldn't reach the level of the Empress, he could still do whatever he wanted once he reached the level of the winged cavalry. "The air here is much better," the Empress said casually as she looked at the boundless grassland outside. In Dayo, there were many places like this. Furthermore, the air here was even better. However, compared to S-City, this place could already be considered as heaven. "Your Majesty, do you want to try driving?" Ren Bachien suggested. In any case, it was impossible to drive over such a boundless grassland. Why not let the Empress have some fun and treat it as a go-kart? All right. The Empress didn't really care. It was fine to give it a try. After Ren Bachien taught the Empress how to turn, the gear, the accelerator, and the brake, the two of them changed positions. The Empress was fully focused on the front. She stepped on the brake with one foot. When she realized that the car wasn't moving, she stepped on the accelerator as if nothing had happened and stepped on it to the end. Ren Bachien, who was caught off guard, was almost thrown into the back seat. "Zixiao, you scared me." Ren Bachien sat up straight and patted his chest. "What do we do now?" the Empress suddenly asked. Her voice was very calm and steady. "What do you mean?" Ren Bachien turned his head and looked at the Empress with a puzzled look. He saw that the Empress was holding onto the steering wheel. There was nothing wrong with it. The problem was that only the steering wheel was in the Empress's hands. She actually pulled it out. Ren Bachien stared blankly. He looked at the boundless grassland in front of them and then looked at the steering wheel in the Empress's hands. Finally, he sighed and said, "Let's do it this way. In any case, it's a grassland and the car won't overturn. If the car really overturns, Zixiao, you must help me out." Half an hour later, Ren Bachien looked at the off-road vehicle that had rolled on the ground for tens of meters before finally collapsing to one side. He then looked at the surroundings. Where could he find another car now? After being carried by the Empress and fluttering in the wind for half an hour, the two of them sat in the off-road vehicle again. This vehicle was slightly newer than the previous one, but this time around, Ren Bachien wasn't prepared to let the Empress try a go-kart again. After another day, the two of them had already arrived at Ren Bachien's original destination, our nation. At night, Ren Bachien and the Empress walked on the streets of an unfamiliar city. They were surrounded by tall Caucasians, which made the Empress frown from time to time. The different races of people around her made her feel somewhat uncomfortable. Even if Great Xia and Dayo were two different nations, it still wouldn't make her feel this way. Ren Bachien looked around and saw that all the words were indecipherable. The people around him also spoke in a language that he couldn't understand. This caused him to be at a loss for a moment. Suddenly, a bald burly man took 2 quick steps forward and stuck close to Ren Bachien's back. He placed a sharp object on Ren Bachien's waist and said fiercely, Chapter 256. Ren Bachien was at a loss and did not know what the other party was talking about. When the other party saw that Ren Bachien did not respond, his face became even more ferocious. At the same time, another person came over and stretched out his hand to pull the Empress into the alley at the side. Before he could touch the Empress, he was sent flying and spat out a pile of broken internal organs in midair. The bald man behind Ren Bachien had a ferocious look on his face. He exerted force in his hand and expected to feel the dagger stabbing into a human body. However, the dagger in his hand was caught by something and could not move at all. Unknowingly, the Empress had grabbed the dagger in his hand. With a gentle twist and a push, the dagger directly pierced into the bald man's abdomen. Following which, the Empress slapped the burly man's head. The contents of his head immediately spurted out from his nose, mouth, and ears. By the time Ren Bachien reacted, The dust had already settled. Renbachian turned his head to look behind him and then looked at the calm empress. He immediately covered his face with a face full of sorrow. They had just run over from China. Before they could even see what the first city was like, the two of them were going to become wanted criminals in our nation again. Their days were simply unbearable. One of his eyes scanned the area outside his palm. There was actually no one nearby. There were only a few figures in the distance. There were also cars driving over from afar. However, the distance was too far and he could not see clearly what was happening here. This wasn't like China. Even in a small county, the streets would be filled with uncles and aunties at night. This place was much more deserted than China. Renbachian immediately rejoiced. Zixiao, drag them into the alley. Otherwise, we will be hunted down again. The empress rolled her eyes at Renbachian. She was a little dissatisfied with his instructions. However, in a flash, she dragged the man who was sent flying by her over. Renbachian also dragged the bald man on the ground into the alley. In such a dark corner, it was very difficult for outsiders to notice. This made Renbachian feel more at ease. First, he ransacked the wallets of the two men. Their wallets added up to a total of more than 3,000 rubles. Renbachian did not understand the exchange rate and did not know the prices here. He did not even know if it was enough for the two of them to have a meal. However, he still took it first. This time, he only had 20,000 rubles in his pocket and had not had the opportunity to exchange them yet. Renbachian asked the empress to send the two of them to the rooftop. He stood at the entrance of the alley and scanned the surroundings. There weren't any surveillance cameras in the vicinity, and no one noticed what happened just now. It could be considered a silver lining in this misfortune. There were bloodstains on the ground from when the bald man was dragged in, but it would take at least 2 or 3 days to find the corpse on the roof. By that time, he would have already left. Renbachian turned around and looked at the empress. The empress's eyes were clear and bright. At first, Renbachian wanted to advise her not to be in a hurry to make a move. However, after thinking that the other party was already holding a knife at his waist, he decided to just let it be. Previously, when she was fighting with Turkey, the empress had never wantonly used her martial arts. Presumably, she knew what she was doing. "Are you cold?" Renbachian asked. It was currently summer in July, but the temperature at night should be less than 20 degrees Celsius. Renbachian could feel a trace of coolness even though he was wearing a short-sleeved shirt. As for the empress, this kind of temperature didn't affect her at all. However, he still wanted to ask something. He felt somewhat apologetic that the empress had helped him kill people and accompanied him in being hunted. The empress turned around and looked at him. Under the dim light of the night, the empress's eyes were very bright. Renbachian felt that they were like stars. "Where are we going next?" the empress asked. "Let's find something to eat first." Renbachian touched his pockets. Now, he was only left with money. However, he didn't know if the shops here accepted RMB. They found a roadside restaurant and ate Russian stewed meat, roasted potatoes, and a bottle of vodka. The taste was a little strange and she wasn't used to it. However, the empress liked the vodka very much. After this meal, he was only left with 200 out of the 3,000 rubles that he looted from them previously. It wasn't even enough for accommodation. Furthermore, it was obvious that the empress wasn't full. However, when Renbachian took out the RMB, she immediately shook her head. This made him feel somewhat helpless. "I might as well rob someone." Renbachian pondered in his heart. This idea was just a thought. In the end, he didn't put it into action. Renbachian felt that he still had a bottom line. In the end, the two of them stayed by the riverside for a night. The next morning, they went to the bank to exchange some rubles and found a place to rest for the day. At night, they left the city and found a secluded corner before returning to Dayo. 3 days after the two of them left, 3 people came to this city to inquire about the empress. After all, the empress's appearance and red dress made her very recognizable. It was very easy for a group of people to inquire about the two of them. Furthermore, they also noticed a strange case in this city. One of the people seemed to have been hit by a car and his internal organs were almost all smashed into pieces. The other person looked fine on the surface, but his brain suffered a heavy blow. Brain juice directly spurted out from his 5 orifices. The strangest thing was that the 2 people's corpses were found on the rooftop. Some of their internal organs were found on the roadside near the building. However, there were only traces of one person being dragged into an alley. How exactly the 2 people ended up on the rooftop and how they died had become a mystery. This strange case had spread far and wide in this small city. It had become the topic of many people's leisure time. When the few of them heard about the 2 people's deaths, they immediately thought of the man named Jin Woo from a few days ago. His entire body was embedded in the wall and couldn't even be pulled out. Even though the conditions of the deceased were different, there was one thing in common. That was, it didn't seem like something a human could do. After reporting this discovery to the higher-ups, the 3 of them followed the direction in which the 2 people left. After passing by the place where the 2 people disappeared, they kept moving forward, and forward. Then they realized that the 2 people had actually disappeared into thin air. When Ren Baqian saw the surroundings of Yangxin Palace Hall, he suddenly felt as if he had returned home. After such a long time, he almost didn't know where his home was anymore. This was especially so after he became a wanted criminal on Earth. "Your Majesty, it has been hard on you these days." Rinpoche turned his head and said softly to the Empress. The Empress returned to the couch in a flash and stretched her body, highlighting her beautiful figure. She fiercely glared at Rinpoche, who was staring at her, before saying, "It's just a casual attack from a clay chicken or a pottery dog. It's not hard on me." Indeed, on Earth, the Empress's strength made her like a god, and there was almost nothing to be afraid of. Rinpoche casually sat down next to the Empress, bent his legs, and asked curiously, "Your Majesty, do you feel like a god on Earth? Everything is like an ant that can be destroyed with a flip of your hand." "Oh." After hearing Rinpoche's question, the Empress fell into deep thought. After a long time, she said, "Just like what you said, we are good at different things. The ordinary aboriginals may seem very powerful to you, but to me, they are no different from the people on your side. On the contrary, I rather admire some of your things. Knowledge is power. I also agree with this saying." Rinpoche laughed after hearing what the Empress said. The Empress was much more clear-headed than he had imagined. He had thought that after going to Earth so many times and being surrounded by ordinary people without any power, she would have such thoughts. If it were him, with such power, he would be able to destroy everything around him with a flip of his hand. Perhaps he would become so arrogant that he couldn't even recognize himself? In the past, he wouldn't even dare to think about the recent events. Now, not only did he do it, but he also didn't feel any psychological burden. At most, he would feel a little sad because he couldn't go home and had to flee. There was a saying that he had seen in movies in the past: "With great power comes great responsibility." Chapter 257. Somewhere in Great Xia, the cold wind was whistling, and the surrounding forest was covered in white. Xia. 7 or 8 horsemen were galloping on the official road at full speed, and the pedestrians on the road all gave way to them. The man in front was dressed in embroidered clothes with a fur cloak draped over his shoulders. He looked young and his face was cold. The people behind him were all dressed in tight clothes and cloaks, and all of them had a small stream embroidered on their chests. This was the symbol of the Lien family, and anyone with some knowledge in the nearby prefectures could recognize it. After all, the Lien family was considered the #1 power in Zhejiang Prefecture. At this moment, other than the man in embroidered clothes who still looked cold, the rest of the people looked relaxed. This mission didn't require much effort, and the Lien family gave them a lot of points. Many people were thinking about whether they should exchange the points for money or exchange them for a martial arts manual. Just as they turned around a call, the man in embroidered clothes suddenly felt alarmed. He pressed his palms on the back of the horse, and his whole body flew out like a rock spreading its wings. At the same time, dozens of arrows were shot from both sides, and all of them were surrounded. The remaining 6 or 7 horsemen roared and wanted to draw their swords, but they were all hit by the arrows and fell off their horses. Only 2 of them managed to escape with injuries on their bodies. "Who's there? Come out." the man in embroidered clothes shouted in the air, drew his sword, and pounced on the figures that appeared on both sides. Zhu Qingjun, you'll stay here today. Two figures followed the shout and flew forward. One of them was holding a serrated knife, and the back of the knife was serrated, which could be used to block people's weapons. The other person was holding a short stick. Zhu Qingjuan's expression changed when he saw the weapons in their hands. He knew both of them, and they were both from the Lian family. Among the 4 remaining consecrators of the Lian family, only the 2 of them were from the Lian family. The one holding the serrated knife was called Lian Peng, and the other was called Lian Zhan. Zhu Qingjun blocked the long knife with his sword and focused all his attention on the short stick. As expected, when it was about to get close to him, the short stick suddenly elongated, and a steel awl-like point emerged from the front end. It shook out 6 plum blossoms in the air, covering Zhu Qingjuan's entire body from top to bottom. As expected, Zhu Qingjun thought to himself. If he didn't happen to know the secret of his opponent's short rod, he would have fallen into his trap. A series of clanging sounds could be heard in the air. Zhu Qingjun exchanged a few moves with the other 2. Even though he was fighting 1 against 2, he was only slightly at a disadvantage. Your strength has actually improved again. Considering your age, you are indeed a talent. Lian Zhan's expression changed in the air, and he could not help but praise. He did not expect that the 2 of them could only barely suppress him in a single exchange. A living talent is a talent, Lian Peng said coldly. You all? Zhu Qingjun was initially puzzled and angry. They were obviously all consecrated members of the Lian clan, so why did they suddenly attack him? Moreover, it seemed like they were determined to kill him. But at this moment, something suddenly flashed through his mind. You're here with the 7 branches sect to kill me? Zhu Qingjun shouted angrily after he landed. Go down and ask the king of hell, Lian Peng said coldly. After Zhu Qingjun landed on the ground, he scanned his surroundings and saw dozens of people surrounding him with knives in their hands. Lian Qizhi sent people to assassinate Qi Zixiao's lover, luring Qi Zixiao to the 9 pavilions. In the end, the 9 pavilions were destroyed, and Emperor Xia lost over 10,000 elite soldiers. Do you all think that you can live after killing me? Lian Qizhi killed me today, and tomorrow, it will be your turn. Hearing this, the faces of the 2 knights who were lucky enough to survive immediately turned pale and filled with despair. Lian Peng's and Lian Zhan's expressions changed drastically. Then, Lian Peng sneered and said, These people can't hear anything. You are wasting your efforts. As for the 2 of us, you don't have to worry about us. Zhu Qingjun glanced at the people around him and asked, Do you all think you can keep me here? What if you include me? A voice came from another direction. Lian Qizhi, how dare you appear? Zhu Qingjun gritted his teeth and looked over. You are at the peak of the man-wheel level. Halfway through his sentence, he suddenly froze and swallowed the remaining half of the sentence, I'll kill you first, into his stomach. Lian Qizhi's joints were cracking, and his qi and blood were rolling in his body like thunder. His aura was rising steadily from the peak of the man-wheel level, to the initial stage of the earth-wheel level, to the intermediate stage of the earth-wheel level, all the way to the advanced stage of the earth-embryo level. Why do you think I am the master of the Lian family? Lian Qizhi was all smiles. At this moment, he was 3 inches taller than before. Zhu Qingjun was speechless. Lian Qizhi had always revealed his strength at the peak of the man-wheel level to the outside world, even though many people felt that he wasn't qualified to be the master. Unexpectedly, he was the most powerful person in the Lian family. Now you can go in peace. It's a pity that you don't have any family members. Otherwise, I could help you take good care of them. But it's good that you don't have to worry about being alone. Lian Qizhi smiled. I'll kill you. Zhu Qingjun looked like he was going to die. There were 3 earth-wheel experts, and one of them was even at the advanced stage of the earth-wheel level. He definitely couldn't escape. He raised his qi and blood to the maximum and pounced on Lian Qizhi. Even if he died, he wanted to bite off a piece of flesh from Lian Qizhi's body. Lian Qizhi flipped his hands and shot out 13 silver beads in a row. All of them hit the body of Zhu Qingjuan's sword. When the last bead hit the sword, a dang sound was heard. The sword in Zhu Qingjuan's hand broke, and his shoulder was pierced by the remaining force of the last bead. His whole body rolled backward and landed on the ground. Zhu Qingjun covered his shoulder with one hand and was overwhelmed with shock. His sword was considered a rare weapon that could even split a boulder in his hand. Yet, it was actually broken by the opponent's silver beads. Lian Qiji was so strong? "You can die in peace now," Lian Qiji said softly as he didn't chase after Zhu Qingjun. Just when Zhu Qingjun knew that he was going to die for sure and everyone thought that the outcome was a foregone conclusion, a burst of applause suddenly came from a tree not far away. Everyone was startled by the applause, especially Lian Qiji. There was actually someone hiding in the vicinity without him noticing. Who exactly was it? They saw a young scholar sitting on the tree with a bookcase on his back. He looked like a scholar who was rushing to take an exam. After carefully sensing his aura, he wasn't much different from an ordinary person. However, no one realized that there was someone up there. Even a fool would know that he wasn't an ordinary person. At this moment, they didn't dare to act rashly. "When I saw you guys coming over half a day ago, I already felt that it would be fun. I didn't expect it to be this fun. This is really too interesting. Qi Zixiao will definitely be very happy to receive you guys as a gift." The scholar was all smiles. "Who are you?" Lian Qiji was flustered, but he forced himself to remain calm on the surface. "Sword, come." The scholar didn't reply. Instead, he stretched out his hand towards the sky and let out a long cry. "You are the sword master?" Lian Qiji's facial expression changed. The other party was actually an extremely rare sword master. Furthermore, he didn't have his sword with him. Lian Qiji immediately felt extremely regretful. 18 silver beads in his hand shot towards the other party's body with a piercing sound. "Io, don't be anxious." The scholar seemed to have missed a step, and his entire body fell towards the bottom of the tree. At the same time, a long sword sneakily flew out of the forest and directly landed in the hands of the falling scholar. The scholar was Ning Kaichen and the sword was Lu Zhu. Ever since the last time she went to Deyo, Lu Zhu had been sneaking around like a thief. After a while, Ning Kaichen grabbed Zhu Qingjun with one hand and ran for his life like a happy rabbit. The bookcase behind him was inlaid with a whole row of silver beads. If it was taken off, it would be worth at least dozens of taels of silver. Lian Qiji's silver bullets could even penetrate a 1-foot-thick tree, but they couldn't penetrate this simple and crude bookcase. "When I heard you say, 'receive you guys as a gift,' I thought you were going to tie them up and give them to Qi Zixiao." Zhu Qingjun endured the pain in his body and couldn't help but say. He didn't care whether the other party would answer him or not. Anyway, he just wanted to speak now. At this moment, Zhu Qingjun had a few more injuries on his body, especially on his legs. When Ning Kaichen appeared, he thought he had met an expert. He didn't expect the other party to actually grab him and run away. He should have thanked the other party for saving him, but he actually used him to block the silver bullets. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so badly injured and his legs were badly mutilated. "Anyway, I can just hand you over to Qi Zixiao. Why do I have to do it myself?" Ning Caichen's forehead was sweating. When he heard the shouting coming from behind, he quickened his pace. Chapter 258. A month later, a coachman with grizzled hair and a bald and ugly old horse pulled the carriage slowly into Lan City. Ning Kaichen opened the curtains and looked outside. There wasn't much difference from when he first arrived. Everywhere was filled with simple-looking aboriginals who revealed ferocious expressions when they saw outsiders. Zhu Qingjun was lying beside him. The injuries on other parts of his body were not obvious from the outside, but his legs were still tightly wrapped with a white cloth. Occasionally, when the carriage shook too much, faint blood would seep into the white cloth. An earthwheel expert's external injuries would usually scar in less than a day. After all, their physical fitness wasn't comparable to that of ordinary people. Even if his legs had suffered such a serious injury, it would normally take a week for them to recover. However, after a whole month, the wounds on his legs hadn't healed. As for the reason, Ning Kaichen had to ask him. Every day, he would give him big bowls of wine and let him eat a type of transparent prawn whose bloodlines could be seen. Zhu Qingjun didn't reject any of these and never questioned them. He just drank the wine and ate the prawn with an indifferent expression. Another important point was that he couldn't muster up much strength. Perhaps this was related to the wine and prawn. Do you have anything else to say? Ning Kaichen put down the curtains and turned to look at Zhu Qingjun. Last words? Can you help me achieve them? At this moment, Zhu Qingjun's body was much thinner than before. His face was paler and there wasn't much luster in his eyes. You can tell me so that you can have some thoughts, Ning Kaichen said softly. He didn't have any hatred or opinions towards Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun even saved his life. The reason why he didn't let Zhu Qingjun's wounds heal was simple. He wasn't confident that he could watch over an earthwheel expert 24 hours a day. However, if the other party was seriously injured, it would be easy. My parents are long dead, and there's nothing to care about. I heard that the people of Dayo like to bury the dead under the plaza. Please find another place to bury me. I don't want to die in peace. Also, dig the pit deeper. I don't want to be dug out by stray dogs, Zhu Qingjun said faintly. I'll try my best. Ning Kaichen felt that he could fulfill this wish of hers. He had brought such a big piece of news to Qi Zixiao and even brought her over. She probably wouldn't mind such a small request, right? From Ning Kaichen's point of view, Qi Zixiao was still relatively easy to talk to. Other than her outstanding martial arts, she was a little cold, a little arrogant, a little bad-tempered, and a little ruthless. Compared to those who would turn their backs on him, such as the people from the 9 pavilions, she was much better. At this moment, the carriage suddenly stopped. Ning Kaichen lifted the curtain and realized that the carriage was already parked by the roadside. He could hear the sound of hooves coming from behind. He knew that it was Dayo's cavalry, so he went back into the carriage. He wouldn't do something so stupid as to fight with the aboriginal cavalry in Lon City. It didn't matter if it was earlier or later. The most important thing was not to cause trouble. Safety first, safety first. Soon, he saw a row of bull riders passing through the middle of the road from the window of the carriage. There were at least 30 of them, and they seemed to be guarding someone. Soon, he saw the person being escorted through the gaps in the group of knights. Although it was only the back view, he could still easily recognize it. It seems that Qi Zixiao treats him pretty well. Ning Kaichen touched his chin and muttered to himself. He actually had 30 earthwheel experts as his bodyguards. Even most of the princes of Great Xia didn't have such treatment. It's really important to find a good wife. Ning Kaichen began to ponder whether there were any powerful princesses in Great Xia who hadn't married yet. Even if they were slightly older, it wasn't impossible to consider them. This was the life of his dreams. After that group of people disappeared, Ning Kaichen then said to the white-haired old man, "Old Huang, turn right after crossing 2 streets and go to the Honglu Bureau." Ren Baqian naturally didn't notice an old friend by the roadside. At this moment, he jumped down from the fork-horned cow with a face full of joy. He carried an item wrapped in cloth and ran excitedly to Yangxin Palace Hall. "Your Majesty, it's done, it's finally done." Ren Baqian laughed heartily as he strode into Yangxin Palace Hall. At this moment, the Empress's entire body was sunk into the sofa. The sofa was made from the skin of a sharp-toothed tiger. In front of her was a wooden coffee table with a laptop on top. The springs in this world weren't very good. After choosing, Ren Baqian chose a type of spring that wasn't very hard. Coupled with the large amount of cotton that he brought from Earth, it was very easy for people to sink into it while sitting on it. However, the Empress liked it this way. It was very comfortable for her to sink into the sofa. When Ren Baqian ran into the palace hall, the Empress didn't even turn her head. She was completely focused on the laptop. Qin Yuan and Hong Wan stood behind the sofa and glared at Ren Baqian. "Is it worth it to exchange 1,000 years of your cultivation for 10 years of his life? There's no such thing as whether it's worth it or not, only whether I'm willing or not." Ren Baqian was speechless. He walked to the side of the sofa and took a look. As expected, the Empress was still reading The Legend of Sword and Fairy. It wasn't until Tsai transformed into a butterfly and left that Lu Jinyuan, who was in a coma, shed a tear. The eyes of Qin Yuan and Hong Luan turned red. Rinpoche's face was full of vigor. Was she that touched? What's the matter? Is it done? The Empress acted as if she had just found out about Rinpoche. Your Majesty, national affairs are more important. Rinpoche lamented. I know. The Empress waved her hand indifferently. Sigh. Rinpoche sighed. Recently, the Empress seemed to have opened the door to a new world. As long as she didn't attend court, she would curl up on the sofa and watch television series. As for Qin Yuan and Hong Luan, they were like the Empress's little tails, following her every day to watch television series. Your Majesty, it's done. Rinpoche adjusted his mood and placed the cloth bag on the coffee table with a proud look on his face. He opened the bag and revealed 2 round glasses. Why do they look a little green? The Empress asked curiously as she picked up the cup. She had seen a lot of glass cups, so she didn't find it strange. However, the cup that Rinpoche took out was made by the glass factory outside Lan City, so it naturally had a different meaning. Even Qin Yuan and Hong Luan didn't look too surprised. They had even watched television series before. Even though this kind of cup carved from gemstones was precious, it wouldn't make a fuss about it. Both of them had seen the world before. It should be because of the iron in the raw material. We just have to think of a way to remove it later, Rinpoche said happily. Since the glass cups were made, it would be much easier to make them later. However, the biggest problem now was that the furnace fire wasn't very stable, so the success rate was relatively low. This required the workers of the glass factory to try it out bit by bit, and it would probably improve after a period of time. This month, the glass factory was finally built and successfully made the first batch of cups today. However, only a few of them were in good condition, and the 2 that Rinpoche brought were in the best condition. Can the sun furnace be made? The Empress still remembered the term that Rinpoche mentioned. In fact, she had learned a lot of words from Earth and some Chinese characters. Well, she learned all of them through television series. She also learned a few words in Russian and English. I want this, in other words, it was, I want this. Well, she basically only talked to Rinpoche. This was the sentence that she most often said to people outside. After a few more days, when the craftsmen are more familiar with it, it will be ready. Rinpoche nodded. Since the glass was made, the first thing to do was to make the solar furnace. After all, the requirements for making it weren't too high. Previously, when he was in Shurching, he had already obtained the installation angle blueprint and the mold for the concave mirror. After making the concave mirror, he just had to brush the silver at the back. He had almost memorized the entire set of techniques. While making the concave mirror, he could also train the craftsmen. After that, he could make pure glass products and sell them for money. One had to know that the precious items in the imperial treasury were still there, but more than half of the gold, silver, and jewels were gone. There wasn't much to begin with, and the Empress used it to purchase weapons. The last time Rinpoche went to the imperial treasury, he saw that it was actually a gift for the Empress's birthday. Now, a portion of the medicinal ingredients were used on Rinpoche and the glass factory. More than half of the money was used. Rinpoche only discovered this when he went to the imperial treasury with the Empress recently. Previously, the Empress didn't even mention this to him. This made Rinpoche feel a little touched, but also a little helpless. If she had mentioned this earlier, he could have brought a bag of nail clippers back and sold it for a lot of money. Chapter 259. One on Earth, every city was brightly lit at night. However, in places where the lights couldn't reach, there were often some evil things happening. For example, at the border of our country, in a city that was rich in beauties, 2 bald youths were pointing a gun at a bruised, yellow-skinned, black-haired youth. Their faces were filled with ridicule. "Khitan people, I hate you. You should scram back to where you belong." A bald youth cursed drunkenly. The black-haired youth's face was filled with fear. He knew who he had met. Those youths were known as the skinheads. They were affiliated with radical parties and held strong hostility towards all outsiders. It wasn't just yellow-skinned Chinese or Vietnamese like him. There were also black-haired people from the Caucasus region, as well as Africans and South Americans. If he met them, he would be punched and kicked. If it was serious, he might even lose his life. 2 years ago, someone was even stabbed to death at the entrance of the university. Now, he only hoped that these 2 people would let him go. At this moment, his heart was filled with fear and regret. He shouldn't have come out alone at night. However, he was muddle-headed and wasted time with that junior sister. I have an interesting game. Why don't we play it? The other bald youth had a malicious smile on his face. He tapped the revolver with his finger and the magazine immediately popped out. He slowly inserted 3 bullets into it. There was an empty space between every 2 bullets. His other hand slid on the magazine. The magazine immediately spun. Then he swung the magazine back to its original position. Let's play a game. As long as you don't die, we will let you go. The bald youth had a face filled with malice and ridicule as he pointed the gun at the black-haired youth. The black-haired youth was almost paralyzed on the ground. His face was filled with fear. 3 bullets and 3 empty spaces. In other words, there was a 50% chance that he would die. The other 50% might not be a good result. The other 2 people looked at the terrified expression of him paralyzed on the ground and let out a burst of laughter. This game is very interesting. I also want to play. At this moment, a man's voice suddenly came from the entrance of the alley. He spoke in broken Russian. Word by word. Who are you? Come out. The bald young man turned around and pointed the gun at him. But just as he turned around, he saw a figure rush into his arms at an extremely fast speed and hit him heavily in the abdomen. Another hand grabbed his wrist and pulled, and the gun was in the other party's hand. Before he could do anything else, the man punched him in the ear again, making him unable to move half of his body and seeing stars. His companion was in an even worse state. A woman in red descended from the sky and stomped him to the ground. One could even hear the sound of his bones breaking. Get lost, we islanders hate you pigs the most. Renbachien held the gun in his hand and pointed at the black-haired man who looked like an exchange student from China. Renbachien was still speaking in poor Russian. The black-haired youth was dumbfounded at first, then he scrambled away, not daring to look back. After running far away, he still had a baffled look on his face. Was that person really a Japanese? Why did he save her? But at that time, that person's back was to the light. Renbachien actually didn't see that person's face and didn't know who that person was. Renbachien stepped on the bald young man's head, then lowered his head and took out bullets from his pocket. He loaded 2 more bullets and slid the magazine back to its original position. I like this game. If you don't die, I will let you off. Renbachien smiled. He had seen many of these bald young men in our nation. A month had passed in Dayo. During this period, he came back 6 times and stayed in our nation for almost a month. He didn't know if he was unlucky or if others were unlucky. Maybe it was because he always came out at night or the Empress was too eye-catching. In a month, he met a total of 7 such violent young men. Most of them were between 15 and 20 years old. They were very childish and immature. They were muddled by some slogans and their minds were filled with violence. In Renbachien's heart, they were just a bunch of kids. Therefore, he must not let them off. Without waiting for the youth to speak, Renbachien immediately pulled the trigger. Bang! The gunshot was very loud. I'm sorry, your luck isn't very good, Renbachien said apologetically to the Sakama with ketchup at his feet. The youth under the Empress's feet struggled with all his might. At this moment he had already sobered up from the alcohol and was trying his best to break free from the person behind him. However, that person was like a nail nailed him to the ground and he couldn't move no matter what. I'm sorry, spare me, spare me. That bald young man cried with all his might. It's just a game, why is there such a big reaction? Renbachien was flabbergasted. Following which, he comforted him gently, be good and listen to me. I am a man of my words. After this shot, I will let you off regardless of whether you die or not. After he finished speaking, he pointed the gun at the other party's head. With a look of disgust, the Empress flashed and appeared a few meters away. Bang! I'm sorry, both of your luck isn't very good. It seems like this game isn't very fun. Renbachien apologized to the 2 piles of Sakama with ketchup. following which he stuffed the gun into his waist. The pedestrians who were attracted by the gunshot immediately screamed in fear when they saw the empty alley and the two piles of sakama. After a while, before the local police arrived, 3 young men and women with black hair and yellow skin dashed into the alley and carefully examined the scene. "Was it done by them?" one of the women asked quickly. "This person's shoulder blade is broken. It seems like it was crushed by someone stepping on it. There is also some mud here. The outline is a footprint. It's most likely done by them." "Damn it, they got away again." That woman cursed angrily. It had been 3 months. For 3 whole months, the other party had never restrained himself. Wherever he went, he would cause all kinds of incidents. Most of them were still murder cases. They had been tracking for 3 months, and every time, they missed by a hair's breadth. They couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's back. Every one of them was proficient in one or more of computer, tracking, fighting, firearms, infiltration, information analysis, and driving cars and planes. Every one of them was an elite among the elites. However, they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail and were being played around in circles by the other party. At this moment, it wasn't just the 3 of them. There was another team of 3 people who were also looking for the traces of the other 2 people. This clearly meant that they were incompetent. When they thought about it, they felt that it was simply a humiliation. Now, they had almost forgotten their original intention of looking for the other party. All they could think of was to catch them and wash away this humiliation. If the other party had absconded obediently, they might not have been so angry. However, the other party had never concealed his whereabouts. He swaggered around unscrupulously, but they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail. How could they be convinced? On top of a tall building not far away, Rinpoche used a pair of binoculars to look at the 3 people coming out of the alley. He said with great interest, "They seem to have been chasing for a long time and haven't given up yet." Following which, he complained, "There are so many cases in the country waiting for them to handle. I have already run so far away. Do they have to chase me so relentlessly? It seems like I haven't posted on my WeChat moments for a long time." Rinpoche thought for a while. In any case, the other party had been following behind him. Even if he didn't post, they would still know where he was. Thinking of this, Rinpoche switched on the phone that he hadn't used for a long time. Then, he aimed it at himself and the building behind him and revealed a bright smile. Zixiao, smile. Rinpoche didn't forget to turn around and shout. The Empress only rolled her eyes at him. The Ren family. These days, Papa Ren and Mama Ren had been worried about their son. They didn't know how he was doing and were afraid that something had happened to him. At this moment, Papa Ren's phone suddenly rang. He picked it up with a start and realized that it was Ren Wanyan, who had just entered university. Papa Ren sighed. He had been waiting for his eldest son to call him for some time. "Dad, quickly look at WeChat. Brother has posted on his WeChat moments." Papa Ren heard his youngest son shouting excitedly when he answered the phone. "What?" Papa Ren was shocked. He quickly opened WeChat to check his WeChat moments and saw the photo that the person he wanted to see the most had just posted. Under the dim light of the night, the background was filled with exotic architecture. Rinpoche faced the camera with a bright smile and even made a very old-fashioned peace sign. Not far behind him was the profile of a woman in red with her long hair fluttering in the wind. There was also a short paragraph below. "The scenery is not bad, but the temperature is a little low and cold. In addition, it has been cloudy recently. Everyone, don't forget to collect the clothes when it rains." Papa Ren and Mama Ren were stunned when they saw Rinpoche's WeChat moments. The Chen family. Chen Qing and Jiang Nan were also stunned when they saw Rinpoche's WeChat moments. This person was simply invincible. He actually dared to swagger and post on his WeChat moments when he was on the run? How much did he want to die? In a car on the street, 2 men and a woman looked gloomy. As the phone rang, the older man lowered his head and looked at the phone. It was a familiar number. He had just reported the situation in the morning. Why was he calling at this time? When he picked up the phone with a gloomy face and heard the content clearly, his face turned as black as the bottom of a pot. A moment later, He received 2 pictures on his phone. On the pictures was Rinpoche's bright smile and that paragraph. The 3 of them looked at the pictures on the phone and their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Chapter 260. 2 days later, Rinpoche and the Empress sat on a train, listening to the rumbling of the train as they toured the rural scenery of this foreign country. They had already left our nation and left on the same night. They first passed through Belarus, which was rich in beauties, then Poland, and finally came to this country. Their destination was the most suitable city for lovers to visit, Prague. Rinpoche had an impression of this city after listening to the song, Prague Square. When he chose his route, he specifically chose the city. Ouch, it's so cold. Rinpoche wrapped his coat tightly, and his face turned red from the cold. The Czech Republic wasn't too cold in early October. The temperature was about 16 or 17 degrees Celsius, but anyone who sat on a train and was exposed to the cold wind for an hour would feel very cold. Yes, on the train. Rinpoche and the Empress were on the train and not inside it. The oncoming wind rushed straight into Rinpoche's mouth. Now, his strength was about 150 kilograms, and he was much stronger than before. However, this didn't mean that he wasn't afraid of the cold. On the contrary, the Empress, who was at the side, wasn't affected at all by the temperature and the cold wind. Her skirt and hair were blown to the back and danced along with the wind. The Empress had a satisfied expression on her face. She squinted her eyes and hugged her knees. Rinpoche realized that the Empress would squint her eyes when she was satisfied and when she wanted to kill someone. The difference was that when she was satisfied, her nose would wrinkle slightly, but when she wanted to kill someone, the corners of her eyes would rise. It was a very subtle difference. As the front of the train entered the tunnel, the 2 of them lay flat on the roof of the carriage and waited to sit up after exiting the tunnel. Since I have nothing to do, let's tease them again. With a malicious smile on his face, Rinpoche took out the old phone from his pocket and switched it on. Then he sent a photo of himself and the wilderness behind him. It feels colder today, and my face is almost frozen. Traveling by train in this season isn't a good choice. Rinpoche ignored the fact that he was on the train and not inside it. He sent the photo along with this message and switched off his phone. After a while, Papa Rin, Mama Rin, Chin Chin, Jiangnan, a certain department was in a state of chaos. Quickly find out where he is. The trio that had been following behind Rinpoche and eating his dust immediately received 2 pictures. Their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Ever since they accepted this mission, the 3 of them felt that they were in a bad mood. It was as if they were living between being teased and trying their best to be teased every day. 3 whole months. No matter who it was, they would go crazy after being teased for 3 months. Ho Yong, where are they? As soon as he received the pictures, the older man among the 3 received a call. As soon as the call connected, he was bombarded with a series of questions. Ho Yong's face darkened. They must have left country R. According to the route, they should be in Belarus now. Find him. Ho Yong hung up the phone and gritted his teeth. He also wanted to find him, but the closest he got was not even a glimpse of his back. Where is he going? Although Ho Yong was furious, he still took out the map and compared the previous route. The cities that the 2 of them had been to before had all been marked. It was a zigzag curve, completely unlike the other fugitives who had a destination. Instead, it was as if they were really on a sightseeing tour. After entering country R from country M, they went as far north as Dixon Island, which was close to the Arctic Circle. They also went to Moscow and stayed there for 2 days, leaving behind a murder case. Then, they went south to the border of Ukraine before turning west to a border city near Belarus. Not only did their movements seem like they were on a sightseeing tour, but they also had no clear destination. Every 10 days, they would commit a murder case. It could be said that they were the poorest, most vicious, and most unscrupulous fugitives that he had seen all these years. At this moment, Rinpoche covered his face with both hands and was deep in thought. Finally, he revealed his major discovery. Zixiao, I think I've been cursed by the Bichi. The Empress turned to look at him and said faintly, Didn't you already know? Ren Baqin sighed. Ever since he met the Bichi, he was captured by the flower eagle, tried to assassinate, and poisoned. It wasn't easy for him to cure the poison, and he was chased and intercepted in Great Xia. When he finally returned to Dayo, he encountered a murderer and then Jin Jun. In the end, he ended up as a wanted criminal. This wasn't the end. Originally, his goal had always been to run away obediently and live a peaceful life. However, no matter where he went, he would encounter trouble. He would be robbed, attacked, robbed. Sometimes, Rinpoche couldn't help but wonder why the security in country R was so bad. It was a big country after all. How did the Chinese who worked and studied in country R survive there? Fortunately, he had finally left that country with terrible security and would never go there again. Rinpoche recalled what happened in the past few months and felt that he was simply too unlucky. Other people might not encounter even once in their lifetime, but he had encountered all of them in a few months. He wouldn't believe that the Bichi didn't play a part in this. Wasn't it said that misfortune and blessing came hand in hand? Why was there only misfortune and no blessing? Where was the blessing? The only thing that gave him a little comfort was that he wasn't the one who died. How long will the curse of the Bichi last? Rinpoche couldn't help but ask. 3 to 5 years at the very least, and I don't know how long it will take, the Empress said faintly. She then added, with me around, you won't die. Rinpoche felt warmth in his heart. He grabbed the Empress's hand. Pow! Rinpoche looked at his hand, which had become swollen like a pig's trotter, and lamented, Zixiao, it's swollen. The Empress snorted and couldn't be bothered to look at him. When they saw the city in front of them, the Empress carried Rinpoche and appeared by the roadside in a flash. I'm standing in the square at dusk in Prague, casting my hope in the wishing pond, the flock of white pigeons with their backs facing the setting sun. The scene is too beautiful for me to look at. Rinpoche hummed a tune as he and the Empress arrived at their destination, Prague. Ho Yong held the map and studied it for a long time. He casually asked the young lady beside him, Cece, if it were you, where would you like to go in the vicinity? Cece glanced at the map and said without hesitation, Brago. That's the most suitable city for lovers and relaxation. Ho Yong slapped his thigh. Weren't they a pair of lovers? They had been inseparable for the past few months. They often went to the supermarket together and even went to Turkey together. Who would believe that they weren't lovers? In that case, their target was most likely to be Prague. Quick, book the plane tickets immediately. After finishing his sentence, he called his superior and said, I suspect that their target is Prague. I'm rushing over now. The other party was silent for a while. Then he said in a relaxed tone, Team 2 has reached Prague yesterday. You guys should set off quickly. You must find them. The piano keys are shining with light. Shining with light. Painted glass windows. Decorated Gothic churches. Who played a piece of music. A piece of wandering sorrow. Looking at the direction of the music, roses were attached to an oil painting from the 18th century. Quietly admiring at the side. Thinking about your romance. Seeing if it's the same for how long. At this moment, Rinpoche felt that he had maxed out his hip-hop talent. However, in the eyes of the Empress, his hip-hop talent was nothing more than a long-winded mumble. Walking into this colorful city, he felt his heart lighten up. However, he still had to buy some ointment like safflower oil that could remove blood stasis and dissolve blood stasis. Chapter 261. Rinpoche was wearing a jacket, jeans, canvas shoes, and carrying a small bag. He looked no different from an ordinary young man who was traveling. If there was any difference, it would be that his female companion was simply too beautiful. It made people cast sidelong glances and endlessly envious of him. On the other hand, the Empress was wearing a red dress that revealed her arms. In such weather, the people around her felt very cold, but she didn't seem to be aware of it at all. Both of them strolled along the streets of the new district of Prague. Occasionally, the Empress would see beautiful clothes in the display window and would faintly say, Here. Once again, the Empress entered a shop that was filled with an exotic style. She paused for a moment in front of a bohemian-style long dress. It was a red dress with blue, white, and black interwoven flowers on it. At the same time, there were white tulle and tassels below the neckline. It was filled with an exotic style and perfectly accentuated the charm of a woman. The Empress stood in front of this dress and scrutinized it for a moment. She had a rare look of hesitation on her face. It could be seen that she liked this dress very much, but she had never worn such a style before. Most of her dresses were bright red. There weren't too many complicated colors, and the style was relatively simple. Many dresses only had a slight difference in the neckline and cuffs. The colors of this dress were too dazzling, and the style was also very complicated. Zixiao, you will definitely look very good in this dress. In this world, there are only clothes that don't match up to you, and there are no clothes that don't look good on you, Renbaqian said gently. He really wanted to see the Empress wearing such a feminine dress. It would definitely be very alluring, Renbaqian said in a gentle and bewitching voice. However, he was right about one thing. A beautiful person would look good in anything they wore. No matter how old-fashioned the clothes were, the Empress would be able to wear them with the feeling of a runway. After a while, the Empress changed into a dress and walked out of the fitting room. Renbaqian immediately exclaimed in admiration and applauded, "Wow! There's no one more beautiful than you in this world. You are the only one, the most resplendent one. I'm sure of it." At this moment, the Empress was wearing an exotic floral dress. The curves of her upper body were completely revealed, and her hair was scattered on her shoulders and back. The corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows carried a trace of gentleness. Her entire being was filled with the charm of a woman. She was gorgeous, and it was difficult for people to take their eyes off her. Renbaqian wasn't the only one. Even the shop owner at the side, a young lady in her 20s, exclaimed in admiration. She quickly ran to the side to retrieve a sky-blue shawl with lace patterns and placed it on the Empress's shoulder. Then she stood at the side and smiled. There was a tinge of jealousy in her smile. While the Empress was standing in front of the mirror and sizing up her slightly different self, Renbaqian had already paid the bill. The price wasn't expensive. The dress and the shawl cost around 700 euros. On the Empress, it made people feel that there should be 2 zeros at the back of the dress. The Empress wasn't used to it after putting it on and wanted to change back into her dress. He stopped her and said, "You should let the whole world know how beautiful you are. Besides, a change of style can also change my mood." The Empress pondered for a while and didn't insist. Renbaqian conveniently took a straw hat from the side and placed it on the Empress's head. It matched the dress very well. As the saying went, a beautiful person would look good in anything. Even a cotton-padded jacket could bring out the vibe of a fashion week. "Can I take a photo?" the shop owner suddenly asked. "What?" Renbaqian didn't really understand the other party's broken English. Of course, even if the other party's English wasn't broken, it would still be very difficult for him to understand. The other party took out his phone and switched it to the photo mode. Renbaqian then understood. "Zixiao, she wants to keep your beauty," Renbaqian said to the Empress with a smile. The Empress held the hat with one hand and allowed the shop owner to take a photo. Then the two of them left the place. Prague was very small. It was more than 400 square kilometers. A level 5 city in Renbaqian's hometown was 40 times the size of Prague. This place was only equivalent to the size of a district in a level 5 city. As the two of them moved forward, the road beneath their feet began to turn into a stone road. It wasn't made of flagstones but small stones. If the soles of their shoes weren't thick enough, the soles of their feet would hurt a little. The temperature wasn't considered high. It was about 17 or 18 degrees Celsius, but it was a sunny and beautiful day. There were always groups of tourists sitting at the tables by the roadside in the cafe. They didn't feel cold at all. Most of them were young couples. There were also friends or families that came here to play. The entire city gave off a very relaxed, leisurely, and comfortable feeling. Renbaqian and the Empress found a cafe and sat down. The Empress held a cup of yogurt and slowly sipped on it. When the dessert was served, she immediately diverted her attention. She tried it once, but she didn't like the taste of coffee. Instead, she liked the yogurt, Another thing that never changed was the dessert and candy. On the crowded Charles Bridge, two people stood at both ends of the bridge. There was another person standing in the middle of the bridge, inspecting the crowd. It's very likely that they have already reached Prague. The photo that person posted on his WeChat moments just now should be of an area north of Prague. The satellite photo is 90% similar. Pay more attention, especially to the lady in red. The man in the middle of the bridge was handsome, amiable, and had a faint smile on his face. It was very easy for people to let down their guard against him. At this moment he spoke to the other two through the microphone on his collar. There were too many people here. There were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. The lady in red was a more obvious target. Since her appearance, although the style of her dress had changed slightly, the color had never changed. People couldn't help but wonder how much she liked the color red. With her ostentatious and unscrupulous behavior, no one thought that she would change her clothes and hide her whereabouts. Got it, the other two answered one after another. Remember, if you find them, don't rashly come into contact with them. Inform me immediately. Also, don't provoke them. They are very dangerous. They are vicious, merciless, and unscrupulous, the man warned again. Understood. The other two naturally knew how dangerous these two people were. The information that they received from time to time over the past few days had already explained how crazy and ruthless they were. I will give you a holiday after we return. The man leaned on the bridge and smiled at the passers-by, causing several blonde and blue-eyed beauties to look interested. Boss, you seem to be raising flags, a man complained. You talk too much. Hey, handsome, do you have time for a cup of coffee? A young girl who looked at most 20 years old and was full of energy came forward to strike up a conversation. Although I really want to go, it's a pity that I'm waiting for someone now, the man said apologetically. His voice was full of magnetism, and his every movement exuded a hormonal aura. The girl's eyes were almost sparkling. This is my phone number. You must call me when you meet the person. The girl took out a pen and wrote a series of numbers on the back of the man's hand. The man kissed the phone number on the back of his hand and smiled, causing the girl's eyes to light up. Boss, you are picking up girls again. I'm being picked up. The man corrected. There's no justice in this world. Don't be distracted. This trip isn't for fun, but for work. Pay more attention to the lady in red. The man repeated his words tirelessly. Looking at the sea of people on Charlie Bridge, he felt as if he had encountered the Golden Week. He had only seen the terrifying sea of people at the tourist attractions during the Golden Week on the internet before. At first, he didn't have the money, but later on, he didn't have the opportunity. Now, he actually felt it in a foreign country. Not only were there many Caucasians here, but there were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. He even saw a group of little Red Riding Hoods. So many people. The Empress sighed as she looked at the sea of people in front of her. The old city area in front is the most beautiful. Rinpoche looked into the distance. Then, the two of them blended into this sea of people. 2 meters away from the two of them, a man wearing a hat was looking around in the crowd. Rinpoche, Chi Zixiao. The lady in red. Rinpoche and Chi Zixiao's faces were blocked by a few tall young Caucasians in front of them. When those young people got out of the way, the man only saw a blue shawl and a straw hat in the crowd and looked away. Chapter 262. Rinpoche and the Empress walked on Charles Bridge. The Empress activated her halo again, and a bone-chilling coldness was emitted from her position. Everyone subconsciously kept a distance of half a meter away from her. This was the subconscious instinct of the surrounding people, and even most people didn't realize this. Although the bridge was like a sea of heads, it was not to the extent that people were rubbing shoulders with each other, so no one noticed this gap. After walking for a short distance, the two of them saw the source of the music and drumming that they had been hearing. A man was sitting on the edge of the bridge, beating a hand drum with one hand and blowing a 1.5-meter-long pipe at the same time. The sound of the hand drum gave the tune a very hollow and distant feeling. The sound of the hand drum made the tune even more primitive. The two of them sized it up for a moment before passing by. There are 30 statues of saints on both sides of the Charles Bridge, each representing a story. As Renbachyan walked, he told the story of the statue to the Empress. He was completely looking at his phone as he was telling the story. He wasn't very qualified as a tour guide and wasn't very dutiful either. After telling the story of the statue, he lost interest and immediately stuffed his phone into his pocket. The Empress didn't understand these histories and allusions. She couldn't feel the deep cultural heritage and didn't care at all. Of course, Renbachyan couldn't feel it. However, the scenery along the coast from the bridge was very beautiful, especially the old city on the other side of the bridge. There were red and white houses everywhere, and tall Gothic towers. These exotic buildings were more beautiful than the statues. He took out his old cell phone and switched it on. Then he stuck close to the Empress and said, "Zixiao, smile." On the screen, one of them had a bright smile on his face, while the other was exquisite and beautiful. Both of them were looking into the distance. The background of the two was a sea of people and the statue of the saint on Charles Bridge. The weather's great, but there are too many people. Renbachyan switched off his phone after posting the post. Papa Ren, Mama Ren, Chin Chin, a certain department, everyone was speechless. It was rare for someone to run to this extent. Papa Ren and Mama Ren were speechless as they looked at the photo on the cell phone. This guy was alive and kicking and had a cheerful look on his face. It was impossible to tell that he was a wanted man. The two of them didn't know if they should be relieved or worried. At least for now, Renbachyan seemed pretty good. But if he continued to jump around like this, he wouldn't be far from going to prison. The two of them were still full of reverence for their country. Who's this? This woman is really beautiful, even more beautiful than a celebrity. Renbachyan was sitting in his dormitory with a very interesting expression on his face, as if he was constipated. As soon as his roommate turned around and saw his expression, he immediately leaned over to take a look at the photo on the phone. Then he was shocked. "My brother and his girlfriend," Renbachyan guessed. "It should be." At the very least, Renbachyan could see the shadow of this woman in his WeChat moments. "Awesome. You must let me see your sister-in-law in person if I have the chance. I want to see the difference between the real person and the photo." The roommate immediately patted him on the shoulder. Renbachyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't even know what to say. Was he going to tell her that his brother was on the run because he was wanted by the entire country? Looking at the smug and brilliant smile on his face, how could anyone tell? And he still had the mood to post it on his moments? She had worried for nothing. In the middle of the bridge, a handsome man was leaning against the side of the bridge, his eyes scanning the crowd. Occasionally, he would exchange glances with the beautiful women passing by, and he would nod and smile. Then, when someone asked for his phone number, he would politely refuse. This had already happened 5 or 6 times. What a beautiful woman! His eyes suddenly fixed on a face under a straw hat in the crowd, and he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. After so many years of experience, this woman was also the best of the best. In particular, the indifference on her face made people want to conquer her even more. Then he realized that this face was a little familiar. His eyes lit up as he said, "It's her. They're here." At this moment, his phone rang. After hesitating for a while, he quickly picked it up. "Shendu, they are on Charles Bridge. I've seen it." Shendu said quickly and hung up the phone. At the same time, he said to the other 2 people, "The target has appeared. He is at my position." First, he quickly advanced parallel to Renbachyan and then cut in front of them. "Can the 2 of you talk for a while? I mean, no harm." Shendu spread out his hands and said. Previously, he had always wanted to meet the 2 people in a more remote place where it would be more convenient to talk. However, he suddenly felt that such a crowded place was actually better. At least in such a crowded place, the other party wouldn't kill him without saying a word, right? Furthermore, it wouldn't be that easy for them to escape. Not interested. Renbachyan loathed the other party as soon as he saw him. He hated gigolos the most in this life. It shouldn't take up too much of your time. Furthermore, it will be beneficial for you. Don't you want to return to China? Shendu said with a smile. His voice was magnetic and very peaceful. It didn't carry any hostility or make people feel threatened. If it were someone else, they would probably have a good impression of him. For such a person, no matter who it was, no one would dislike him. However, Renbachyan hated him even more. I'm not representing myself. It's not me who wants to talk to you, but the nation. Shendu smiled and said to the Empress. It had to be said that Shendu was very good at communicating with people. First, he showed that he wasn't hostile. Second, he showed that he knew the other party's identity but didn't point it out so that the other party wouldn't suddenly explode. Finally, he brought up the killer weapon of the nation. His words could make people's imaginations run wild and want to hear him continue. Especially to two people who were being hunted down. Renbachyan's brain quickly turned twice, trying to guess what the other party meant. The other party was representing the nation? The nation wanted to talk to the two of them? But what did the nation know? You look very much like someone I hate, the Water Empress suddenly said. The smile that Shendu had been maintaining suddenly froze. This isn't important. I'm not that person. What's important is to talk to the nation. It's only beneficial for you. I hate him too. Renbachyan turned his head and said to the Empress with his eyebrows knitted together. He really hated this person. If there was a reason, it would be that he was too handsome. What surprised him was that the Empress had already expressed her hatred for him before he even saw her. At this moment, Shendu's smile was really stiff. He completely didn't know how he offended these two people. The next second, Shendu drew an arc and fell into the river under the bridge. Chief! Another man who had just squeezed out from the crowd saw this scene and immediately shouted. Then he also fell in an arc. The surrounding people were completely shocked by this scene. Only a small number of people saw that it was the woman wearing the straw hat who threw the two people into the river. Most of them still didn't understand what happened. I'm your brother, and I won't watch the two of you get married. It's simply a disgrace for two men to get married. Both of you better calm down. Renbachyan leaned on the stone railing and shouted to the people below. Some of the surrounding people who understood suddenly came to a realization and rushed to the side of the bridge. There were also people who were good at English who translated what Renbachyan shouted to the others. The people nearby were worried at first, but when they saw the two people emerging from the water, they gave their blessings to the two people below the bridge. Applause rang out from the surrounding people. Chapter 263. Zixiao, who do you think he looks like? After leaving Charles Bridge, Renbachyan turned around and asked the Empress. He was thinking about the seventh prince of Great Xia. He didn't know how that guy was doing. If he killed him, would he become stronger? It was a pity that the prince of Great Xia wasn't that easy to kill. What he didn't know was that the seventh prince's head had already been reduced to bones. It was the evening before he broke through the visualization of water. Hua Sanlu, the Empress said faintly. That person reminded her of Hua Sanlu as he looked like him. However, she understood what he said. Otherwise, she would have smacked him to death. The fifth most powerful expert in the world? Renbachyan was surprised. He had never seen Hua Sanlu before and didn't know if Shendu looked the same as him. Maybe they just looked alike. If they looked exactly the same, then it would be more interesting. He asked the Empress what was on his mind. Do they look alike? The Empress shook her head slightly, just a little. Renbachyan nodded. It was normal to have people who looked alike. However, the nation wanted to talk to him? Interesting. I wonder what the nation knows. They probably don't know that I can transmigrate? In that case, they probably know about the laboratory and want to know where I got it. Do I have any other things? This possibility is quite high. I have a lot of good things. It's not impossible to cooperate with the nation. Just like that longevity saber, it's very magical but not very useful. Renbachyan was originally prepared to build a physical chemistry laboratory in the future. Cooperating with the nation would save him a lot of trouble. However, he still had to put on airs. Climbing up a pole wasn't a business deal. At the thought of this, he relaxed and continued to tour the old city of Prague with the Empress. They stopped for a while under the Tower of Charles Bridge and went straight to the legendary Old Square of Prague. I saw them, but the mission failed. Shen Du climbed out of the water and used the phone of his companion who wasn't thrown into the water to make a call. What happened? The person on the other side of the phone asked in a deep voice. I don't know, they said they hate me. Shen Du gritted his teeth when he said this. He didn't expect that he, who was loved by everyone, would have such a day. The person on the other side of the phone was silent for a while before comforting him. Don't worry, you aren't RMB. Not everyone likes you. Follow them first. The first group will be there soon. Shen Du's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Why do I feel like there's something wrong with your words? There wasn't any conflict, right? The person on the other side asked again. Shen Du's face darkened even further. There was no conflict. They just said that they hated me and threw me into the Vltava River. From your voice, it sounds like you're fine. Don't get into a conflict with them. Number 2 is still alright, but I'm afraid that number 1 is somewhat inhuman. This was the code name given by the department. Number 2 was Ren Baqian, and number 1 was Qi Zixiao. After all, Ren Baqian used to be an ordinary person. Everything changed after Qi Zixiao appeared by his side. Qi Zixiao was the key. Ren Baqian and the Empress walked around Prague Square for a long time. There were white pigeons flying all around, and they could see couples holding hands and hugging each other everywhere. Ren Baqian lowered his head and looked at the Empress's hand. Then he looked at his left hand, which was still swollen. In the end, he dispelled that thought. When the two of them were walking around the square, they heard the melodious sound of a bell. They followed the sound and ran to the astronomical clock. I want this. The Empress pointed at the astronomical clock after sizing it up for a long time. Ren Baqian knew that the Empress didn't want this clock, but wanted to build a similar clock tower in Lan City. It was indeed much more convenient to have a clock. There was no need to look at the sky to estimate the time. When it was cloudy and raining, the sun couldn't be seen and there was no accurate time. But Ren Baqian nodded. It shouldn't be difficult to make such a clock. The main thing was to find someone to make the design. Some of the parts that couldn't be made in Dayo could also be made on Earth. After the glass was made, he would sell the old clock and earn a lot of money. In the end, there were too many things that could be used to make money. Sometimes, Ren Baqian didn't know what to choose. Even the simplest nail clippers could be sold for a lot of money. Needles could also be used. Although Dayo mostly used bone needles, many animal bones that couldn't be found on Earth were very tough after being ground into needles. However, they could still be sold to other countries for a lot of money. In particular, needles were small in size. If a caravan could bring a lot of them, the profits would definitely not be low. After the concave mirror was made, he would specially organize a caravan and carefully prepare some goods. Those countries had been making money in Dayo for so many years, and it was time for them to spit out some of it. They walked and strolled along the way. Very soon, the sky turned dark. After dinner, they strolled along the streets of the old city. Suddenly, a bright flame shone in the sky. Fireworks? Ren Baqian looked up and was slightly surprised. Following which, a smile appeared on his face. At this moment, fireworks were being set off on a small boat in the river downstream of Charlie Bridge. There were always all kinds of surprises in this romantic city. The Empress was even more surprised than Ren Baqian. This was the first time she saw fireworks. The flowers in the sky made her eyes shine with a different light. The light from the fireworks shone on their faces, making them bright and dark at times. Not far away, there was a couple hugging each other and shouting in surprise. Ren Baqian was infected by this atmosphere. He made up his mind and used his pig-trotter-like hand to grab the Empress's palm. There wasn't the expected hill. Ren Baqian grabbed it firmly and a slender and soft palm fell into his palm. Ren Baqian turned his head to look at the Empress, but she raised her head to look at the fireworks. However, her eyes were a little wandering and her ears were a little hot. You are the most beautiful treasure that heaven has given to this world. Ren Baqian whispered in her ear. The Empress's ears turned even redder. Renbachien sniffed the fragrance from the Empress's body and felt the softness and warmth of her hand. A kind of satisfaction and happiness filled his heart, making it full of warmth. The fireworks ended very quickly. After all, it was a private fireworks display and wouldn't last for half an hour. When the two of them stood there for a few minutes and still didn't see the fireworks rise, Renbachien knew that the fireworks had ended. It was a little regretful. It would be better if this moment could last a little longer. However, he didn't let go. He held the Empress's hand all along and pulled her up. Not far behind the two of them, there were 3 people. 2 of them were a couple, and the other was a single dog. He looked at the couples on the street with a face full of resentment. Renbachien smiled as he walked past. He listened to the joyful shouts coming from behind him and felt the surging affection between the two of them. Although the fireworks were gone, the warmth between the two of them was still there. He still hoped that the street would be longer so that they could walk a little longer. The Empress lowered her head slightly as if she was counting the stones on the ground. "Sorry to disturb the two of you." 3 people in front stopped the two of them. The Water Empress raised her head. Her eyes were filled with a bone-chilling coldness. It only took an instant for her to go from warmth to coldness. The Empress's hand left Renbachien's pigtrotter. Feeling the Empress's hand being pulled away from his palm, Renbachien's eyes widened, and he flew into a rage. "You know that I'm disturbing you, yet you still come out." His right hand reached behind his waist, pulled out his gun and fired. His face was filled with resentment. "How long has it been? After such a long time, I've finally managed to hold her hand and nurture our relationship. How dare you come out to disturb me? You're apologizing to me? If apologies were useful, why would we need the police? Why would he need a gun?" The 3 of them were shocked by Renbachien's actions. They hurriedly ran to the side and broke the window of the house next to them. Bang! 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 3 consecutive gunshots rang out, and the stone chips on the ground flew everywhere. Renbachien gritted his teeth and threw the revolver that he had snatched from them through the window. Chapter 264. When Ho Yong and the other 2 came out of the house, the 2 people outside had already disappeared. They are simply too vile, too excessive, too vicious. How could the higher-ups negotiate with such people? Cece gritted her teeth as glass shards fell from her body. "It's not like you haven't read the information." Ho Yong was also angry, but he suppressed it because he knew that this was a serious matter. Thinking about the information she had read these days, Cece couldn't vent her anger anymore. The woman in the information was simply inhuman. They were shooting at the ground and didn't really want to do anything to you. Shendu and the other 2 walked out from the side. Shendu was in a good mood. At least he said a few words, and these 3 people were worse off than him. He immediately felt better. "Umph." Ho Yong and the other 2 snorted. These 2 people had committed a total of 6 cases in our nation, and about 20 people had died. What they did in China was even more outrageous. The other party had already taken out their guns, and the 3 of them didn't dare to bet on whether they would shoot them or not. "But you guys really deserve to be single." Shendu teased. "They are having a sweet time there, but you guys were in such a hurry to disturb them. I already told you to wait a little longer, but you guys didn't believe me. Now that you have lost everything, I don't know when we will be able to stop them again." "Stop making sarcastic remarks. Weren't you thrown into the river too?" Ho Yong scolded. "Being thrown into the river by such a beauty might be a blessing. It's better than being shot." Shendu didn't seem to care. Ho Yong's face turned black. "Are you trying to disgust us?" "Group leader Shin, you must tell us when you and Lu Tong get married. We will give you our blessings," Cece said. Hearing this, Shendu's face turned black as well. That damn bastard was too vicious. "I will add a chicken drumstick for you tonight." Ho Yong gave Cece an admiring look. "Aren't you going back?" the Empress asked casually as she looked at the colorful city under the night sky. She was a little surprised when he opened fire just now. In fact, she already understood what that person on the bridge said in the afternoon. Otherwise, she would have killed him with a slap. "You look like someone I hate, so I'll kill you." This logic was valid in the Empress's mind. However, the Empress still remembered that Rinpoche had a wronged look on his face when he first escaped. She felt that he probably still wanted to go back. "Of course, we have to go back," Rinpoche said as he looked down. At this time, the two of them were in the astronomical clock tower. Sometimes, the two of them would stay in the hotel for a night. Of course, they wouldn't go through the front desk. It was indeed troublesome to not have a passport, but Rinpoche had yet to find a suitable person to make 2 passports. At this time, looking at the colorful city under the night sky from the tower, there were still some people wandering in the square below. After hearing Rinpoche's reply, the Empress didn't say anything else. Rinpoche turned his head and looked at the Empress with an expression that said, "Why don't you ask? I'll tell you if you ask." Unfortunately, the Empress didn't even look at him. Rinpoche held back for a long time. In the end, his face turned from one of anticipation to one of bitterness. Sure enough, it was impossible to wait for the Empress to play the role of a sidekick. However, he couldn't see the smile in the Empress's eyes. "We definitely have to go back. After all, we're familiar with the place and it's more convenient for us to do anything. However, even though the nation wants to cooperate with us on certain things, the nation is made up of people, and people's thoughts are the most unreliable. If we go back like this, what if people think that we're easy to bully? What if someone points at us and says this and that every day, and they feel that it's only right? What should we do then? We can't possibly go on a killing spree or run away again, right? If that happens, the other party won't be able to tolerate it. Therefore, we have to put on airs first. It's better to get what we can't get. This way, after we have a good talk with the other party will scrutinize us carefully, and it will save us a lot of trouble in the future." Just like the Empress, Rinpoche turned his head and looked at the plaza outside as he spoke unhurriedly. He was just an ordinary person with good stuff in his hands. He really didn't want to go back to the city and be in constant trouble. At that time, he couldn't just cause a ruckus at the slightest provocation. The Empress thought about his words. There were too many twists and turns, and she felt that it was too troublesome. If someone tried to take advantage of her, she could just slap them to death. If someone came looking for trouble, she could just slap them to death. If someone wasn't pleasing to the eye, she could just slap them to death. There was no need to be so troublesome. The two of them stood there for a long time before Rinpoche said, "Let's go back." The Empress grabbed his wrist, and the two of them disappeared from the tower. On the 2nd and 3rd day, the two groups discovered that the two of them had disappeared again. However, everyone was already used to it. They would always disappear for 8 to 15 days, and then reappear for 3 to 5 days. Many people were curious about what they did when they disappeared. Hiding their tracks? That was impossible. It would be inconceivable if the two of them could hide their tracks. But if they weren't hiding their tracks, what were they doing? At the same time, a certain department in the country invited some people to hold a special meeting. Previously, they thought that by finding the two of them, they would be able to achieve their goal. After all, Rinpoche was still a little red flower. Through some forums, they found some of his previous statements, and it showed that he had trust and a good impression of the country. However, they didn't expect the two groups to actually fail. The other party even pulled out their guns without any hesitation. Even though they only shot at the ground, this also explained some problems. After this meeting, with the help of some people, a group of psychologists, criminologists, and other people was formed to study the thoughts of the two of them. Rinpoche thought that the country was coveting the things in his hands because of the laboratory. In fact, it was only because of a video and some things found at the scene of the Jean family's death that made some people realize that there was a superhuman like the Empress in this world. A superhuman represented too many things, such as the direction of human evolution, super soldiers, and many more. Then, they discovered some of the things that the laboratory was researching. The two of them became more important in the eyes of the country. In this newly formed group, they made various hypotheses about the disappearance of the two of them, such as the remains of a prehistoric civilization, an alien spaceship, a legendary paradise, or hibernation. Hibernation was proposed by a biologist. He felt that, according to some of the information, the strength that the Empress displayed was completely unbearable for humans. Therefore, she had to hibernate every once in a while to recover her body. The Empress sat in the seat of honor, looking indifferent and dignified. Not far away sat Ren Baqian and the head of the Public Security Bureau, Tai Yan. Two people stood in front of Yangxin Palace Hall. One was Ning Kaichen, the other was Zhu Qingjun. At this moment, even though Zhu Qingjun's face was pale, he looked indifferent and had completely disregarded life and death. Neither he nor Ning Kaichen felt that he could return alive. "What do you want?" The Empress looked at Ning Kaichen and asked. Ning Kaichen couldn't have specially sent Ren Baqian over out of kindness. Ning Kaichen smiled shyly. "Actually, I don't want anything. After all, Deputy Prefect Ren and I hit it off at first sight. However, my spirit sword Green Pearl was seriously damaged this time and I need some materials to repair it. It would be great if the Empress of Dayo could give me a handful of cloud crystals, or an appropriate amount of white dragon grass and stone marrow." Tai Yan's eyes were like knives as he stared at Ning Kaichen. Cloud crystals were considered rare treasures, and a handful of them could be exchanged for a city. Even though white dragon grass and stone marrow weren't as precious as cloud crystals, they were still very valuable. "You are really demanding an exorbitant price. You actually want to sell this person for the price of a city. I can't give you cloud crystals, but I will get someone to send you the white dragon grass and stone marrow later," the Empress said. Since someone had delivered the information that she wanted, she wouldn't be stingy with her rewards. As for whether it was worth it or not, according to the words in the television series that day, it didn't matter if it was worth it or not, it only depended on whether one wanted it or not. Soon after, Ning Kaichen was brought away. "Your Majesty, it's my fault." Tai Yan stood up and apologized. "You can collect your salary for 3 months. The Empress waved her hand. "As for this person, I will leave his corpse intact and bury him somewhere outside the city." The Empress's gaze drifted across Zhu Qingjuan's body without a trace of emotion. Leaving his corpse intact was already on account of him telling her everything. "Your Majesty!" Ren Baqian suddenly called out. "What's the matter?" The Empress looked at Ren Baqian with a gentler gaze. "I would like to ask you a few questions." Ren Baqian stood up and saw the Empress nodding. He then turned around and asked, "Since the Lien family knows that they have been exposed, will they still stay there?" In his heart, nothing was more important than his life, especially things like wealth and status. If he died, he would lose everything. What about the Lien family? In order to suppress this matter, they didn't even hesitate to kill people to keep their mouths shut. What would they do now? Ning Kaichen had been here for a month. If they sent people over, they would have already run away. Lien Qiji should be there, and most of them won't leave either. After all, the Lien family is located in the hinterland of Great Xia. I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to send people there. However, they should arrange for a small number of young and talented people to leave and hide first. Zhu Qingjun looked at Ren Baqian and then said faintly. Just like what he said, it wasn't easy for Dayo to send people to the hinterland of Great Xia. The Lien family was located much deeper than the 9 pavilions. If it wasn't for the incident at the 9 pavilions, the Lien family wouldn't be so worried that Qi Zixiao would go crazy again. As for the tens of thousands of casualties in Great Xia, it couldn't be blamed on the Lien family. On the contrary, the Lien family's incident this time even led Qi Zixiao to Great Xia. Therefore, the Lien family would at most find an opportunity to suppress them, but it wouldn't be too serious. I feel that the most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. If the Lien family can't be reunited, it would be too cruel. In order to ferret out the Lien family, we might need a husky. Ren Baqian cupped his hands and said to the Empress. The aboriginals were too conspicuous. It would indeed be troublesome to send people to Great Xia to exterminate the Lien family. Therefore, a mad dog that had a grudge against the Lien family couldn't be better. In any case, even if they failed, they wouldn't lose anything. As for implicating the entire family, he didn't feel any pressure at all. In the first place, they were the ones who attacked him first, so he couldn't be blamed. Just like the Jin family, there might be some among them who didn't do evil and didn't know anything about what happened to him. However, what they enjoyed was the money they earned from their evil deeds. If they succeeded, those people would also enjoy the money stained with their own blood. Since they became rich because of this, they couldn't blame them for suffering because of this. Moreover, if they didn't pull out the roots, wouldn't they be able to survive for the new year? Tai Yan looked at Rinpoche with admiration and muttered something. The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. These words are good and imposing. I have to memorize them. Chapter 265. Rinpoche walked into the dimly lit prison. The warden carried a lantern and led the way while Su Wei followed closely behind. Rinpoche walked with his legs splayed out. He had just returned from looking at the fields outside the city. Every time he rode a fork-horned cow, he would feel a burning pain in his inner thigh. These days, he had obtained some fields from other sources. Now, he had a total of 200 mu of land. After exchanging fields with others, he finally managed to gather 200 mu of land. After all, everyone still gave the Empress some face. Today, Rinpoche went to take a look at the 200 mu of land. Tai Dao and Teng Hulu were in charge of it. They also hired more than 20 people, including women, children, and the elderly. However, these people were very strong. They were even stronger than the young and strong men on earth. Rinpoche watched as they carried 2 buckets the size of a water tank with great strides. Previously, when he was injured and asked for forgiveness, he brought 2 bags of seasoning seeds which were only enough to sow 50 mu of land. Fortunately, the sesame seeds in the beast park were ripe and could sow 20 mu of land. The rest of the land was planted with sweet potatoes and other crops from this world. After walking 1 round in the fields, Rinpoche returned to the city at noon and went to the prison to see Zhu Qingjun. Rinpoche was rather familiar with this prison. A few months ago, he was thrown here when he first arrived. At that time, all he could think of was how to keep his head. Who would have thought that things would take a turn for the worse and end up like this? The prison was made of stone on both sides and had an iron door in the middle. There weren't many prisoners in the prison, so there wasn't much noise. There weren't any scenes of people knocking on the iron door and crying out for their grievances like those on television. Foreigners were usually beheaded after staying here for a few days. There weren't many aboriginals who were captured here. At most, they would get into fights and be released after being whipped. Theft and robbery were basically non-existent in Lon City. In Lon City, if you threw a brick and hit someone, that person might be an earthwill expert. "Open the door, I'll go in and take a look," Rinpoche said when he reached the prison cell. The cell wasn't locked and there was only an iron bar stuck outside. The aboriginals were too strong and had too many experts. They were never afraid of a prison break. Even if they could, they wouldn't be able to escape. The prison cell was very dark with only a small window shining in. At this moment, Zhu Qingjuan's complexion looked much better. After he stopped drinking wine and eating those shrimps, the injury on his leg was almost healed within a few days. Rinpoche stood at the door and looked at him. He also looked up at Rinpoche. The warden stood in front of Rinpoche to prevent him from suddenly going berserk. He had also heard of Deputy Prefect Ren's strength. "How about it? I saved your life, didn't I? Shouldn't you repay me?" Rinpoche said with a smile. On that day, Zhu Qingju knew that he probably wouldn't die. Although he was imprisoned, he had been waiting to settle the score with the Lien family. He even thought that the other party would say something. No matter what, as long as the target was the Lien family, he would agree. However, he didn't expect to hear such a reply, which made him a little stunned. "I'm naturally willing to deal with the Lien family. But you won't believe me so easily, right?" Zhu Qingjun said. "That's easy. Just 1 poison will do. It's like a jelly bean. It won't affect anything if you eat it, and it tastes pretty good. After taking it, one would die if there was no antidote for a period of time. After taking the antidote, one would live. Isn't that simple? I feel that since the Lien family has treated you so badly, you won't seek your own death for the sake of the Lien family," Rinpoche said. His voice was similar to those villains in his memory. In fact, what he did was similar to those villains. Zhu Chengjun laughed after hearing Rinpoche's words. It's indeed very simple. Give me the poison. There's no hurry. I'm still making the poison. Ordinary poisons don't taste good. I spent a lot of effort to coat it with a layer of sugar without destroying its medicinal properties. You stay here for a few days first. I'll let you out after a few days when it's done. Rinpoche waved his hand as though he was thinking for him. Zhu Chengjun laughed after hearing what Rinpoche said. At this stage, who would still care about the taste of poison? Yet, the other party was wasting his time in such a place. I'm here today to see how you are. I'm relieved to see that you're fine. Rinpoche nodded his head, turned around and left. Give him something good to eat. Don't let him starve. In fact, he didn't need to make poison. It was the job of the clinic. What he needed to do was to pack the sarin gas separately. It was too extravagant to throw the whole bottle out like before. He only had a few bottles left, so he had to use them sparingly. Moreover, if he threw the whole bottle out, not only the Lien family, but also the entire city, many people would die. By then, Great Xia would definitely be in an uproar. Rinpoche felt that as a person, it was better to leave some leeway. There was no need to be so ruthless. The most important thing was that Great Xia still had so many experts, especially the top experts. Even though many of them didn't show up normally, poisoning a city to death was too ruthless. Who knew if a few of them would jump out to exterminate evil and defend justice? For example, that fairy-like Li Yuanzhu. In any case, no matter who it was, he would be in big trouble. The guards by his side wouldn't be able to defend against such an expert. Rinpoche returned to the palace. After lunch, he sat beside the Empress and accompanied her to watch The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. The Empress even asked a few times why there was no The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 2. Rinpoche was at a loss. If the Empress asked him, who should he ask? When it was time to practice, Rinpoche stood in the middle of the training ground. Tong Lan was still opposite him. She was the little Lolita with 2 buns on her head. Just like how the Empress liked red clothes, she liked white clothes. She wore white clothes every day. The only difference was that the flowers embroidered on her clothes were different. You have put on weight again. You are already 10 years old and should be married in a few years. You are so fat, who would dare to marry you? Rinpoche trash-talked and looked for the other party's flaws. You are already an adult, but you can't even beat me. Don't you have any shame? Tong Lan was not polite at all. Her grandfather, Tong Zhinya, had told her not to give him face and beat him up ruthlessly. Chance. Rinpoche saw Tong Lan roll her eyes when she spoke and immediately pounced on her like a ferocious tiger. After a month of hard training, his strength had improved a lot. He could already withstand one move from the little Lolita. Bang! Rinpoche lay on the ground and looked at the blue sky and white clouds. Over the past few days, he hadn't improved much in other aspects, but his ability to withstand beatings had improved tremendously. Furthermore, he didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation or retreat when fighting. His entire person was more spirited and had an indomitable aura. In the eyes of others, he was still a noob. However, Rinpoche knew that he had improved a lot. He had already advanced from a level 1 noob to a level 2 noob. When he surpassed the level 9 noob and became a supreme noob, Rinpoche felt that he would be able to defeat this 10-year-old Lolita. After thinking about it carefully, he didn't know why, but he felt like crying. Such is life. After returning to Earth, Rinpoche went to Vienna from Prague. Vienna was a famous music city with all kinds of concert halls. Rinpoche and the Empress even specially went to listen to a classical concert. After that, their impression of the concert was that they slept soundly. When they returned, Rinpoche had already decided that his next destination would be the fashion city, Milan. They will definitely go to Milan. In a certain department, more than one person thought of this. Arrange for a few people who are good at dealing with people to go there. The men shouldn't be too handsome and the women shouldn't be too beautiful, a psychologist suggested. Following which, he said with some regret, "Unfortunately, I don't meet the requirements." Chapter 266. Rinpoche looked at the poisonous pill in front of him, which was the size of the fist of a 4 to 5-year-old child. His face was full of vigor, and his expression was clearly saying, "Are you kidding me? According to your request, take the antidote once every half a month. Otherwise, your intestines will rot and you will die. However, this is the limit for the size. The smell of one of the herbs is too strong, and it can't be concealed without a large amount of honey and a few other herbs. If the pill is too small, it won't have enough medicinal power. An earthwheel expert might not die from it." The doctor from the physician's bureau also had a look of disbelief on his face. He had never heard of anyone making this kind of poison that had to be sweet. Or this, the smell is too strong. The doctor took out another box and opened it. Rinpoche smelled a strange smell that made him feel as if it was dug out from his foot. The pill inside was indeed much smaller than the 6-flavored Rehmannia pill that Rinpoche had eaten before. "This is it. You have to keep your word. I told him it's sweet, so it has to be sweet." Rinpoche immediately kept the box and turned to leave. He wasn't eating it anyway. "You have to swallow it whole," the doctor added slowly. Rinpoche waved his arms with his back facing the doctor. Although the people around him were at least at the earthwheel level and didn't seem to be anything special. However, a second-rate aristocratic family in Great Xia only had a few earthwheel experts. Although the earthwheel level was divided into the initial, intermediate, advanced, and peak levels, an initial earthwheel expert could block bullets with a saber, jump 6 to 7 meters high, and have at least 1 to 2,000 kilograms of strength. On Earth, he was already considered a Superman. Zhu Qingjun was at the intermediate level of the earthwheel level and was even stronger. It was easy for him to swallow the pill, even if it was a little big. Rinpoche asked someone to bring Zhu Qingjun to the palace. He sat in the garden of Pingle Park with a box on the stone table in front of him. When Zhu Qingjun was brought in, Rinpoche was playing Plants vs. Zombies on his phone. "Wait, it will be ready soon." Rinpoche looked at the phone screen nervously. After a while, he put down the phone and looked at the other party carefully. His cheeks were thin, his lips were thin, and his expression was cold. He gave off the feeling that he was a reliable person. He was dirty and had straw in his hair. However, he was much better off than Rinpoche when he was only wearing a pair of underpants. He seemed to be in good spirits. There shouldn't be too much to say. You work for me, and I'll give you the antidote. If you do well, I will detoxify you. You're just an earthwheel expert, so I don't have to spend too much effort on you." Rinpoche sized him up and nodded. Originally, Zhu Qingjun was still wondering what the thing in Rinpoche's hand that could make a sound was. When he heard Rinpoche's words, anger rose in his heart. Rinpoche's words were indeed somewhat arrogant. With his strength, no matter where he went in Great Xia, he would be valued. When had he ever been looked down upon like this? However, after thinking about what he had seen over the past 2 days, even the prison warden was at the earthwheel level. All the imperial guards in the palace were at least at the earthwheel level. Rinpoche couldn't help but sigh. The aboriginals had too much of an advantage. Originally, I could have arranged for anyone to do it. It's very easy to find someone to do it, but I felt that you would be able to drag out the people of the Lien family hiding in the underground cave, so I gave you this opportunity. You can live, and you can also take revenge. It's the best of both worlds. It's just a small deal between us. Once you're done, you can fly as high as you want, Rinpoche continued. There are still a few earthwheel experts in the Lien family. Lien Qiji himself is close to an advanced earthwheel expert. It won't be easy for you to find someone to deal with them. Zhu Qingjun couldn't help but ask. Rinpoche's words made him feel that he was worthless in the eyes of the other party. It's not that troublesome. Rinpoche waved his hand and said, "You can throw this small bottle in at night. It doesn't matter if you are a hooligan or a hooligan." When Zhu Qingjun saw the transparent bottle in Rinpoche's hand, he suddenly remembered that even though Rinpoche looked no different from an ordinary person, his name had spread far and wide in Great Xia. Commoners might not know much, but almost everyone with a bit of status knew. Poison warrior. He poisoned the 9 pavilions and tens of thousands of Daeyo's elite soldiers to death. Is that poison in his hand? 8 spirit wheel level pavilion masters of the 9 pavilions died under his poison. Even a spirit wheel expert couldn't withstand it, let alone an earth wheel expert. Indeed, the other party could have just found a random person to throw the bottle into the Lien family. No wonder the other party didn't care about him at all. At the thought of this, Zhu Qingjun felt slightly disappointed. A person's value needed to be recognized by others. When others denied your value, most people would feel disappointed. Alright, eat it, swallow it whole. Ren Baqian pushed the box in front of Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun opened the box and stared blankly. How could a child's fist be swallowed? This medicine is still very reliable. As long as you take the antidote regularly, you will definitely not die. If you don't take the antidote, you will definitely not survive. It won't act up prematurely or later. It's very stable. It's just a little big. I believe in you, there won't be any problem. Ren Baqian encouraged him. Zhu Qingjun closed his eyes and stuffed the pill into his mouth. Then he continued to stuff it down. Ren Baqian saw that his throat was swollen, just like a snake swallowing a large prey. Seeing that Zhu Qingjun almost choked to death after swallowing the super big pill, Ren Baqian hurriedly asked someone to get him some water. It took him a long time to recover from his coughing. After that, Ren Baqian gave Zhu Qingjun half a year's worth of antidote, a small bottle of sarin gas, and a bottle of antidote. Finally, he gave Zhu Qingjun his contact details before letting someone bring him away. When Zhu Qingjun walked out of the palace, he suddenly felt that the sky was a little brighter. On the way to Deyo, he thought that he would definitely die. He did not expect that not only would he be able to take revenge, but he would also have a chance to survive. No matter what, the first thing to do now was to take revenge. He had done so much for the Lien family, but in the end, he was silenced. He could not rely on the other party to keep his word. He had to find someone to see if the poison could be cured. Although he had to take revenge on the Lien family, the feeling of having his life and death ring in the hands of others wasn't pleasant either. No matter what, he was still an earthwheel expert. Now that he had survived, it was his instinct to want to control his own life. As long as he survived this time, he would definitely work hard in the future. He would work hard by hook or by crook. He would never be looked down upon like this again. The river flows east for 30 years, and the river flows west for 30 years. Do not bully the young for being poor. Zhu Qingjun's indifferent face was filled with resolution and determination. Ren Baqian's words had more or less hurt his pride. Even if he could understand, he still couldn't let go of the other party's contempt. Oh, that Zhu Qingjun was drinking in a pub? Ren Baqian initially thought that Zhu Qingjun would leave immediately. He didn't expect him to find a place to drink first. Was this considered as a way to celebrate his survival? After that, he had a conflict with someone and was severely injured. If it wasn't for the people from the Public Order Bureau who arrived in time, I'm afraid he would have been beaten to death, the guard continued. Ren Baqian spat out a mouthful of tea. It wasn't easy for him to save Zhu Qingjun's life. Chapter 267. That night, Zhu Qingjun was quickly sent away from Lan City. Ren Baqian really didn't dare to let him stay here any longer. If he were to lose his mind and throw out that bottle of sarin gas, it would be fun to watch. However, Ren Baqian also thought of some other matters. After he returned, he wasn't in a hurry to exterminate the Lien family. Instead, he needed to locate the other members of the Lien family first. After all, although they were sent to other places, they still had some contact with the Lien family. If the Lien clan was exterminated first, those people might really conceal their identities and go into hiding. At that time, it would not be easy to dig out those rats. In any case, as long as this husky was sent back to Great Xia, everything else would have nothing to do with him. It would be best if he succeeded, but it didn't matter if he failed. However, he also felt that although the Aboriginals were very strong, there were many things that were really inconvenient. For example, if he had another group of people under him, he wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Another example would be sending spies out. The Aboriginals had very few spies in the outside world. They completely relied on a small number of caravans, such as the 2 caravans of the royal family, to gather some information while traveling outside. There were also a few skinnier aboriginals who looked more like ordinary aboriginals from the other empires. However, the aboriginals weren't good at this. Furthermore, the people from the other nations were also very wary of them, so it wasn't easy for them to gather information. Renbachien felt that the remnant citizens of the Hao nation in the south were a good choice. However, he now counted the matters at hand. On one hand, there was the matter of the glass, and on the other hand, there was the matter of the well salt in the mountains that had not been dealt with. After these 2 matters were settled, he was prepared to make a trip to the south. However, the incident with the glass had caused Renbachien to pull out quite a lot of his hair. Looking at the hair on his pillow every day, Renbachien decided to shave his head bald. It was easy to remove the color of the glass as long as the iron in the glass was oxidized with potassium nitrate. Potassium nitrate was also relatively easy to obtain. However, the silver mirror reaction really made Renbachien want to vomit blood. He listed out all the silver reaction processes that he had found on the internet. First of all, ammonia was not available. Secondly, to obtain nitric acid, one needed nitrogen dioxide plus water, or sodium nitrate plus sulfuric acid. To make nitric oxide, however, you need nitric acid. As for sodium nitrate, he had yet to discover where it could be found in this world. After a long time, it turned out that to need eggs, there had to be chickens first. However, chickens still needed eggs to hatch. After Renbachien shaved his head bald, he started to scratch his scalp. Renbachien's scalp was about to be scratched off, but he couldn't do anything about it. Feeling helpless, he felt that it would be better for him to move from Earth to this world. Later on, when this world had the concept of chemistry, he would let them study it. "I want to teach a few students," Renbachien suddenly said when he found the Empress. The Empress was a little surprised. She didn't expect him to have such a thought. Wasn't he afraid of trouble the most? These thoughts were practically written all over the Empress's face. "There are some things that I have to do, but I don't even have enough time to spend on it. I feel that it's better to teach a few students so that I can relax in the future," Renbachien said helplessly. Every day, he had to spend half of his time practicing martial arts and doing all kinds of things. Renbachien felt that his time was definitely not limited to 24 hours. At the very least, he had much less time than others. The Empress first asked Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan to wait outside. After looking at Renbachien for a long time, she said, "Actually, I have always had this thought. Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation all have their own national academies. However, there was no such place in Dayo. Since you want to teach a few students, why don't you build an academy so that the aboriginals can have a place to learn some things? Originally, I wanted to discuss this matter at a later time. Since you have brought it up, why don't we do it this way?" Renbachien opened his mouth wide and was a little stunned. He only wanted to teach a few students so that they could help him do some things. Why did it suddenly become an academy? If it was a few days later, he might not necessarily object to it. However, he still had to practice martial arts every day. There was also the glass factory and the like. He also had to think about how to fill up the treasury of the palace. Where would he find the time? "Why are you unwilling?" The Empress's expression changed in an instant. It wasn't ice-cold but yearning. Her eyes were filled with expectation. These few years, Dayo has sent out many people, but they haven't been able to gain much. Even though the various officials in the imperial court have obtained some books from other nations, they aren't systematic and there is no one to teach them. As for the ordinary aboriginals, it is already very difficult for them to learn words, let alone other things. You have told me before that knowledge is power. In your world, countless ordinary people are the foundation. The geniuses born among them lead the direction of the entire world. Only then can they reach that stage. However, it is too difficult for my Dayo to achieve this. As the Empress spoke, she got up from the couch and walked in front of Renbachien. She stared straight into Renbachien's eyes as if she wanted to see through his heart. "Only you can do this and let me see the scene that I want to see. In that case, Are you willing to do this for me? Her eyes were bright and her face was filled with expectation as she waited for Rinpoche's answer. This wasn't the first time Rinpoche saw such an expression. When he first arrived on Earth and looked at the brightly lit city, her expression was somewhat similar to this one. However, this was the first time the Empress showed such an expression to him. The distance between their faces was less than 10 centimeters. Rinpoche could feel the heat that was transmitted to his body when she breathed. He could also smell the fragrance that was coming from her. He could even see himself in her eyes, which made his heart beat faster. The direction that your gaze points to is the direction that I will advance in, Rinpoche said gently. Upon hearing this, the Empress revealed a rare bright smile on her face. Following which, she returned to the couch with a smile on her face and said, "That's settled then. You will be in charge of the new school. As for the name, let's call it. I will leave the honor of naming it to you." The Empress seriously considered for a while and realized that she actually couldn't think of a suitable name. She immediately handed over the responsibility of naming it to Rinpoche. Rinpoche looked at the Empress's triumphant expression and the smile at the corner of her mouth. Then, he thought about her expression and tone that didn't match her character. He felt that the Empress had learned bad things from those period dramas. Indeed, he had opened the door to a new world for the Empress. However, they have to start from learning how to read, Rinpoche said bluntly. Originally, he wanted to translate the words from Earth into the words of this world. At this moment, he simply changed his mind and let them start from simplified Chinese. You can make the arrangements. I hope to see a batch of real talents emerge from it, the Empress said. I'll do my best. Rinpoche thought for a while. Those who had received basic education should be considered talents in Dayo. He would pick out a few who were smarter, quick-witted, and could accept new things to learn more things. They would then be his assistants. What about the students? How do we recruit them? Not all of the children in the imperial court are gifted. Those who aren't gifted will be sent to the school, the Empress said while scratching her chin. Rinpoche spread his hands. Just now, the Empress made it sound as if she had pinned all her hopes on this school. In the end, it would become a shelter for useless people. However, those who were gifted would definitely focus on practicing martial arts. After all, this world wasn't Earth. In the end, martial arts were still the most important. Even though martial arts couldn't solve all problems, it could solve most of them. Chapter 268. In the throne room, Tongjinya, you old man, do you want to taste the sharpness of this old man's saber? Qin Chuan's eyes were like two copper bells, and his voice was so loud that it could lift the roof. Ever since he heard this from somewhere, everyone's ears had grown calluses. Master Qin, do you think I'm afraid of you? Last time at House Yunyan, I don't know who fell into the puddle afterward. Tongjinya had a faint smile on his face. Many people burst out laughing. The last time they fought at the top of the brothel, both sides were supposed to be tied. In the end, Qin Chuan's wife shouted from below. At that time, Qin Chuan was caught unprepared and was kicked into a puddle in the neighboring courtyard by Tongjinya. Qin Chuan regarded this matter as a great humiliation. He didn't expect that Tongjinya would use this to provoke him at this time. He was so angry that his eyes turned red, and he slammed into Qin Chuan. In an instant, there was almost an afterimage behind him. Qin Chuan was already prepared. He punched out with both fists, one above and one below. Just like that, the two of them started fighting in the throne room. The people around them were already used to this kind of thing. Lord Qin's Black Tiger Steel's heart move is really quick. Mr. Qin, it's Black Tiger Steel's heart again. Mr. Qin, it's still Black Tiger Steel's heart. Everyone nodded and discussed. If Rinpoche were here, his eyeballs would have popped out. Was Dayo's court assembly like this? Minister of War, what the hell are you doing with the words Black Tiger digging out heart and Black Tiger digging out heart? And Tongjinya, where are you kicking? There's even a kick to the groin? The Empress sat in the seat of honor with one hand resting on her chin. She was bored to death as she watched the two of them fight. She was thinking about Hua Qiangu, whom she had seen last night. After a long while, The Empress sat up slightly and looked to her left and right. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. She picked up two red objects that were about 7 inches long, 3.5 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. She weighed them in her hand and then flew them toward the two of them with a whistling sound. "You're right." Put, put. The two objects smashed into the two men's heads and immediately broke into pieces. The two men patted the dust off their heads and turned to look for the source of the hidden weapons. Then, they cupped their hands and greeted, "Your Majesty." Almost every time, it would end like this. "There's one more thing. I'm going to set up a school in the next few days. If there are any suitable descendants in your families, you can send them over." The Empress wiped her hands after throwing the brick away. Then she cupped her chin and said, "Academy?" Everyone was stunned. "I've heard of academies, but the other 3 countries have them. However, this was the first time in Dayo." "Your Majesty, who is in charge of the academy?" Shi Qing asked as he shook his sleeves. Opening a school was a good thing, but who would teach them? "Ren Baqian, Deputy Prefect Ren," the Empress said faintly. Everyone was stunned for a moment, then asked, "Your Majesty, what kind of disciple do you want?" "Smart and quick-witted, don't be too old," the Empress said faintly. This was requested by Ren Baqian. They were too old and difficult to teach. Their worldview had already been formed. However, they couldn't all be too young. If they were 7 or 8 years old, they would have to learn for 10 years before they could use them. It would be best if some of them were 15 or 16 years old. After 2 or 3 years of study, they would be of use. As for the younger ones, we can slowly nurture them. After hearing the Empress's request, everyone nodded in agreement. They didn't know if Ren Baqian had the ability to do so. Anyway, he had a lot of strange things in his hands. Since Her Majesty had spoken and the matter of the academy wasn't a big deal, everyone naturally wouldn't object. However, it was another matter if there were any suitable disciples in the family. At this point in time, Ren Baqian had also seen the location of the academy. It was just beside the palace. On one side of the palace was a beast park and on the other side was a martial arts training ground. The main purpose was for the imperial guards to practice martial arts during their shifts. It was more than 200 meters long and 100 meters wide. There were many huge rocks like the ones Ren Baqian saw Xiong Pai playing with before. There were also various kinds of stone locks and some wooden stakes that were as thick as the mouth of a bowl and about 2 meters tall. Ren Baqian saw an imperial guard that he had seen before standing 150 meters away with a bow. The guard shot an arrow and the wooden stake, which was as thick as the mouth of a bowl, broke into 2. This power was equivalent to that of a sniper rifle. There was an empty space beside this martial arts training ground. It was slightly smaller than the martial arts training ground. It had never been used and had long been overgrown with weeds. Next to this empty space was a forest. The location of the academy was this deserted empty space. Ren Baqian walked one round here and had a plan in mind. In any case, there wouldn't be many students and he wouldn't have the time to teach even if there were more. He just had to build a courtyard and a few rooms. In Ren Baqian's mind, 30 to 40 students would be enough. However, it was time to return to Earth. These things could be discussed after they returned. "Zixiao, let's go and rob," Ren Baqian said to the Empress with a serious face. "Look, there's only 25,000 left." It had been 4 months since they had fled, but they had only been on Earth for slightly more than a month. The original 1 million yuan was worth more than 120,000 euros. Even though they didn't have many accommodations during this trip to Europe, the Empress still spent 100,000 yuan in 1 month. It was faster than what Ren Baqian had expected. Furthermore, this was Milan, the famous fashion capital. He was afraid that the two of them would be penniless when they left this place. It was easy to find a target. He heard that there were many mafias in Italy. After hearing Ren Baqian's words, the Empress seriously considered it. She hesitated for a moment between shopping and robbing. After about a second, she looked at Ren Baqian and nodded, "Okay." Ren Baqian almost laughed out loud. The serious expression on the Empress's face when she seriously considered this matter was really too interesting. "What are you laughing at?" The Empress squinted her eyes and looked at him. Robbing didn't give her any psychological burden. Today, a large portion of Daeyeou's weapons were looted when they attacked the Yun nation in the early years. Needless to say, the entire Daeyeou was looted. I think it should be like this. Everything under the heavens belongs to the king. What belongs to them belongs to you, your majesty. Ren Baqien had a serious look on his face. Saying it this way sounded more elegant. The Empress thought about it again. Pow! Ren Baqien looked at his pig-trotter-like hand with a hidden bitterness on his face. Your Majesty, when did you learn to fight like this? The two of them weren't in a hurry to buy anything. Instead, they strolled around the city. The Roman, Gothic, and Renaissance buildings that could be seen everywhere piqued their interest. When they arrived at the square of the Milan Cathedral, the Empress took a few more glances at the magnificent buildings in the distance. This kind of Gothic architecture always attracted people's attention at first glance. Under the blue sky, the cathedral, the square, the tourists on the square, and the pigeons that could be seen everywhere formed a beautiful picture. When the two of them walked on the square, a flock of pigeons flew past them. A big black man placed a handful of pigeon food in Ren Baqien's hand. Immediately, a few pigeons flew towards Ren Baqien as if they had found their target. One of them pecked at his hand. Ren Baqien smiled and scattered the food in his hand. Immediately, a flock of pigeons flew around the two of them. A few people at the side couldn't help but take out their mobile phones to take pictures of the lady in red who was surrounded by pigeons. As for Ren Baqien, he was treated as a backdrop. When the pigeons landed, the big black man stretched out his hand with a smile on his face and said, "Money." Ren Baqien looked at him and laughed. This was the usual routine of these people. First, they would stuff a handful of pigeon food in your hand and let you enjoy the feeling of being surrounded by pigeons. Then they would ask for money. If you didn't give money, then very soon, 3 to 5 big black men would appear. Furthermore, these people mainly targeted people with yellow skin. Get lost. Ren Baqien maintained his smile, but his tone was filled with contempt. He had already calculated that when the big black man's helpers arrived, he would take them down together. Then he and the Empress would randomly find a remote place, and then these people would follow them and give them money. Although the money might not be a lot, the wealth of a millionaire was also accumulated over time. They couldn't just give up on picking up the pigeons just because they didn't have much money. After all, they had to specifically find suitable targets to rob. Now, they just had to bend over and pick up the pigeons. Sure enough, after a whistle, 4 tall and strong big black men immediately surrounded the two of them. They were mumbling something and had a threatening expression on their faces. Ren Baqien snapped his fingers, and the Empress looked at him with dissatisfaction. There are too many people and there are so many people watching. Ren Baqien smiled shyly and pointed to the surroundings. They only felt a gust of wind blow past them. In the next second, the 4 of them cried out in pain and fell to the ground. No one present could see what exactly happened. The Empress's movements were too fast. Ren Baqien timely put on a shocked expression and said, "You guys actually faked falling." However, just as he shouted this, he saw a few people take off their coats, revealing their police uniforms. Chapter 269. We are the Federal Police. May I ask if they threatened you? After a few Italian police officers surrounded them, one of them pointed at the people at his feet and asked Ren Baqien. It was in Italian. Ren Baqien was at a loss. He looked at the ID that the other party flashed and thought for a while. He should be saying that we have defeated someone and wants us to follow them to the police station? Which eye of his saw us hitting people? Ren Baqien didn't know if he was talking to himself or to the Empress, but he sounded a little doubtful. Ren Baqien knew his situation very well. Both of them did not even have passports and were burdened with cases. If they were to enter the police station, they would have no choice but to fight their way out. There was no need to enter the police station. With a few more questions from the police, the two of them would give themselves away. He would have to kill his way out sooner or later, so it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. It was a pity that he had only been in Milan for half a day and had yet to take a look around. Damned fishing law enforcement. Renbachien cursed in his heart. All of a sudden, he leaped up and stomped his feet on the ground. In an instant, he appeared in front of the police officer and gave him a tight slap on his ear. Renbachien's current strength was around 330 kilograms, which was considered quite strong. That police officer did not even have the chance to groan before he was smashed to the ground like a wooden stake. The police officers were stunned by the sudden turn of events. What was going on? The rest of them hurriedly reached for their holsters, but before they could pull out their guns, they were all sent flying. The onlookers were also stunned. A middle-aged man in the crowd had a satisfied look on his face. He had sent people to monitor the route from the north to Milan, and sure enough, the two of them had arrived. He had guessed their route and destination, so he had come here in advance to wait for them. Knowing that the two of them were extremely vicious, he was afraid that they would get into trouble again. He even hired a few Italian police officers to help them clean up the mess. This was to prevent the two of them from escaping after committing a crime like they did in Japan. This could be considered as a sign of his sincerity. However, he had guessed the beginning correctly, but not the ending. When he saw Renbachien suddenly slap the police officer, the expression on his face froze in an instant. In the next second, the police officers were all lying on the ground, unconscious. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't you feel any pressure at all when you openly attack a police officer? Do you still have a little bit of conscience? Can't you guys share the good stuff? Are you going to fight all over the world? Did they really think that the country was useless? Well, some countries in Europe were indeed incompetent. The middle-aged man looked like he was about to vomit blood. Seeing that Renbachien and Gu Shijio were about to leave, he hurriedly chased after them and asked, "Can I have a word with you too?" Renbachien and the Empress ignored him, turned around, and left. The people around them made way for the two of them. That middle-aged man chased Renbachien for half a street. Renbachien suddenly stopped, and his hand was already on his waist. The middle-aged man was startled by Renbachien's actions. He consciously raised his hands to show that he had no ill intentions and said, "I'm here to help you." Renbachien pulled up his pants and grinned at him, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. "I'm here to help you. Can we talk? I'm not representing myself." "You know what I mean," the middle-aged man said quickly, afraid that the other party would lose their minds. "I'm not free," Renbachien replied. "If the two of you are worried about the Italian police, our men will take care of those police officers," the middle-aged man continued. When Renbachien heard this, he felt that it was somewhat interesting. "They are the undercover agents that you planted here?" Renbachien's face was full of vigor. The middle-aged man almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Recently, we have done a lot of things to help you clean up the mess you left behind. Otherwise, do you think that the Japanese police wouldn't be able to find out about the two of you?" The middle-aged man continued and pointed to a coffee shop by the roadside. "The two of you, sit down and have a chat." Renbachien looked at the Empress, but she didn't care about this at all. Her gaze was focused in the distance. Renbachien followed her gaze and saw a bright display window. There was a floral skirt paired with a red top. "All right, you look more pleasing to the eye than the previous few." Renbachien nodded. In any case, the other party had helped him clean up a lot of messes. Furthermore, he didn't have much money on hand. If they could come to an agreement, would he be able to transfer the 20 million yuan to Chongqing? After a while, the three of them sat in the coffee shop. "Let me introduce myself first. My surname is Chen Shi," the middle-aged man introduced himself. At the same time, he sized up the two of them. Renbachien, male, 25 years old, Han Chinese, graduated from SY University, then worked at SY Zhongqing Trading Company for 8 months. All the information was clearly remembered in his mind. However, at this moment, Renbachien looked completely different from the delicate and slightly reserved young man in the photo. Compared to the photo, he was much more robust, bald, and gave off a very strange vibe. On one hand, he didn't seem to care much about anything. On the other hand, he gave off a very sharp vibe. At the same time, there was a little shadow of his previous self. As for the other person, Qi Zixiao, female, unknown. Other than her name and gender, everything else was unknown. It was as if she had popped out from a crack in a rock. After all, for a person like her, it was impossible to hide her looks, temperament, and strength. Especially when she was sitting there without saying a word, she gave off a little pressure. It was as if she was someone who held the power of life and death for a long time. It was impossible for such a person to have popped out from a crack in a rock. However, he couldn't find any information about her. It was a complete blank. It was these two people who had committed so many crimes in their country. After escaping to our nation, they didn't restrain themselves at all. Along the way, they went sightseeing and committed murder after murder. In their eyes, human life was like grass. According to the recent investigation, a murder in Austria should be related to these two people. Oh! Ren Baqian nodded and stirred his cup with a small spoon. The Empress hugged her yogurt and slurped it in small mouthfuls. Chen Shi waited for a long time, but the two of them didn't have any intention to continue the conversation. He looked slightly helpless. "Those Italian police officers just now were helping you," Chen Shi finally said. "Oh, I thought they were arresting us," Ren Baqian said innocently. Chen Shi looked at Ren Baqian's innocent expression and felt his chest tighten. "Couldn't you have asked more? There were so many people around. As long as you opened your mouth, someone would immediately tell you what they were talking about. Furthermore, I was standing right beside you. Who would have thought that you would make a move in front of so many people without saying a word? I knew that you would stir up trouble here. I specially bribed a few police officers to help me clean up the place. I was afraid that you would stir up trouble again," Chen Shi said with a sullen face. Ren Baqian nodded. He thought that the police and robbers had encountered a fishing expedition. "However, you are disturbing me from picking up money." Seeing that Ren Baqian was indifferent and Qi Zixiao was focused on drinking yogurt, Chen Shi felt even more sullen. "How much work have we done for you? Bribing the Italian police and interfering with our nation's investigation. We have done all these things that we shouldn't have done. Don't the two of you know what to do?" If it was someone else, he would have already slammed the table. However, he really didn't dare to do so in front of these two people. The other party would definitely turn hostile and leave. He didn't know how long it would take to find them again. If he angered them, they would shoot him and continue to escape. He believed that they would definitely do such a thing. These two people were extremely daring. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.